When August Bark emerged from the gloomy chill of the air-conditioned divisional fighter control bunker, it was 17:15 hours CET. The day had ripened into one of those mellow summer afternoons when the air is warm and sweet, like soft toffee, and anyone with an ounce of sense is reclining in the grass, smelling the honeysuckle and wild strawberries, half listening to the insects, and watching blues and brimstones fluttering fast enough to avoid the swallows above them that glide and wheel and wait and wait. Both Max and August dozed contentedly, hypnotized by the sunlit countryside that moved past like a swinging watch. The dark blue Luftwaffe Citroën made good speed down the main road from Arnhem, past Utrecht, all the way to the small town of Temple, where it turned off north through Leiden, heading towards The Hague, where General Christiansen, First World War ace fighter pilot, was now military governor of the Netherlands. They were beyond Leiden before Max awoke from his reverie. He stirred and lit cigars for both of them. "You were on the East Front last year, August? Perhaps now that the sun shines on the great grasslands of the Ukraine, you wish you were back there. Birch forests, long summer evenings, buxom country girls, balalaikas, caviar, medals arriving with the mail. That's what it says in the recruiting pamphlets. All I remember is endless snow, my eyelashes iced over, and on Christmas morning one of the sentries frozen alive so that we had to hack his rifle out of his hand with an axe." "So that's how you all got Eisbeinorden," said Max. "That's how we all got aufs Eis geführt," said August. It meant led up the garden. Max looked anxiously at his driver, but he seemed not to have heard. "Were you ever stationed with your son?" "For a month, near Lake Ilmen in March of last year. His battalion was pulled out of the line after their casualties had reached 60% during the winter offensive. For a month, they were on communication assignment not 2 miles from the airfield where I had my radar installation. That was good. He is not commissioned yet. So I couldn't take him to our mess, Bummador. It was in any case only a grain store with a stove and some old chairs. You must have had plenty to talk about. Staying warm, that's all anyone talks about in a Russian winter. My Luftwaffe unit was still wearing its summer uniforms. Peter's infantry regiment had some overcoats they had taken off Russian backs and some odds and ends of furs and lined boots that Goebbels had persuaded German civilians to part with. Peter bribed his quartermaster to let me have some coats and hats. In return, I showed him how 3 skilled men, under cover of darkness, could steal 24 loaves from a mobile bakery unit. It makes a man very proud to exchange such knowledge with his son. For a month you were together. It was the first day of the spring thaw when they left, March 15th. There was a watery sun that noon, and for an hour there was the slightest of breaks in the intense cold. I went down to the railhead to say goodbye. His unit had found a piano factory almost intact. When they fired bullets into the lines of pianos, there were strange resonant trills and jangling overtones. Hand grenades made a demented musical scream. Peter said it was the best fun he'd had since the attack on Vyazma the previous October. "Are you frightened for the boy?" "August? My God. Max, I am. Could you not arrange a posting, after all? He has served on the Russian front for, 18 months? 21 months. He'd never forgive me. Max, how would he feel? How would any of us feel? Not doing our duty, well, you mean, I'd feel damn good, August. What would you do if you were posted back there? Would you do your utmost to avoid it?" "Who knows, Max? Seriously." "August. For God's sake, Max! Do you think I've never thought about it? Do you know what it's like to find yourself wishing your own son would have his leg shot off, just so he will survive?" "I'm sorry, August. Forget it, Max. It's not good to think of these things in advance. In war, all things are possible and nothing inevitable." "Who said that?" "I said it," said August. There is but a second of time, a stroke of a pen, a misinterpreted look, a fingered trigger between us and a knight's cross, a court-martial. Sainthood or eternal damnation. Do you hear from your son? Every few weeks, and he hates the war as you hate it. Max, my friend, I have to tell you he likes it. We have given our world to our children. Can we be surprised that these children are destructive? Every fit, aggressive youngster who tries hard can get himself a bomber or a U-boat or an artillery battery and wreak havoc upon the world that it's taken us old men so long to put together. 19-year-old children creep up on a 20,000-ton merchant ship, press a button, and watch it die. Writhing like a wingless fly, they set fire to great cities and turn our society upside down in return for bits of coloured ribbon. Where have we failed? Max? What manner of children will they breed? And what manner of world will they shape? We ask them to count their victims like headhunters, marking each death with a notch, a painted tally or a new promotion. What will they unleash upon us? Max, dare I say you are a hypocrite? August, my friend, you pronounce judgment upon the men who fight. You call our heroes murderers, but you do not disdain the respect and admiration due to a fighter pilot expert. And at your throat you wear your trinket. Your tally is well known and gains for you respect from soldier and civilian alike. Oh no, August? You want to eat your cake and throw it into the faces of lesser men like me. You don't understand. Then explain. You are confusing heroism with morality. A man can be brave and yet do dishonorable things. His individual act might be honorable and yet the result dishonorable. Give me an example. August, the RAF bomber crews, they are brave men. The risks they run are high and yet they kill women and children. You go too far. August, they are cowardly monsters. They drop their bombs and take to their heels in the darkness, leaving people to burn. So do our U-boat crews who torpedo a merchant ship and steal away in the night, leaving people to drown. Yet both are brave. Talk, talk, talk. August, you know as well as I do that we are all victims of circumstance. When the order comes, we shall press the trigger, merely because the individual cannot challenge a system. Why try, as you said earlier? Whether a man is commanding a U-boat, allocating civilian fuel supplies, or even flying an RAF bomber is largely a matter of chance. Perhaps you are right, Max. Perhaps I have too much time to think. He watched the people on the crowded pavements of The Hague. For every happy, bemedaled young officer, there were 100 men and women who looked tired and dejected. Ah, August, my friend. Why so sad? This was but a friendly fight, such as two old friends might have over a cigar. The car turned into the Plein, and the Luftwaffe sentry saluted the car without caring if it was empty or full. Go carefully with me. Max, a man in love is fragile. Max smiled. But it's a good cigar. Eh? August? Magnificent? Then take the box. A man in love never knows when he might need a box of cigars. August tried to refuse them, but Max closed his hands around August's and pressed the big box of cigars onto him. Major Georg Tuchel will be doing this run for the time being. Phone him here any weekday morning if you want a ride. I have already spoken with him. There'll be no difficulty. Max turned to the driver. Take the Oberleutnant to radar station Ermin. I'll log you for another 2 hours and see you in the morning at the usual time. The driver closed the car door and saluted Oberst Max Sepp. Max stayed on the steps and waved to August as the car departed. For nearly an hour the driver drove silently, but as they entered the prohibited zone, August sensed that he had something to say. He offered him a cigar, but he preferred a cigarette. Here, near the coast, he was driving more slowly. It was a strange, deserted place. Occasionally they passed a farm cart with its heavy-footed Zealand horses, or a bicycle with homemade wooden tires slapping the cobbles. When the last village had vanished behind them, the narrow concrete road became a sandy track, and suddenly the North Sea appeared through the mist. The scrubby, grass-topped dunes are 20 or 30 feet high, and beyond them is only a table-flat beach of fine sand, and then the sea. From it had come the dense, white mist that clings like icy steam and reduces visibility to 50 feet. The sentries were wearing their overcoats, and they walked stiffly around the radar station, which, like this whole coastline, was a forest of barbed wire and steel stakes. The bushes and wire-like grass had been bent double by the wind from the sea. In the lee of the dunes the air was still, and the white mist scarcely moved, but the bushes were still deformed and bowed. The only creatures happy to be there were the birds which skimmed low over the bunkers and could breed protected by barbed wire. Even the bird-watchers couldn't get near them now, and 500 square miles of northern Europe's coast had become a vast nature reserve guarded by the Wehrmacht. The Citroen's tires slid in the soft sand, but the driver insisted upon driving Oberleutnant Bach right to the very door of his quarters. He always did. He opened the door for August and saluted him formally. "Thank you," said August. "See my Feldwebel, and he will fix you up with some eggs." The boy nodded. It was all exactly as it always was. Except for one thing. "It's about the Herr Oberst," said the driver nervously. "What about him?" said August. "I think the Oberleutnant would like to know that the Herr Oberst has been ordered to join an infantry regiment on the Russian front, or L. Many officers have. They go on Thursday. We shall miss the Herr Oberst." "So shall I," said August. "Thank you." The driver saluted again and walked across to get his eggs. "It upset me, Victor, I can tell you that, and couldn't eat a bite of lunch." The medical officer shook his head in brief, silent anguish. "I've seen it before. Victor. Exhibitionism." "What do you mean?" asked Löwenherz. "That surprises you, does it?" Hans Fürth, Kroonstyk's medical officer, pointed to a cupboard which contained his bottle of brandy and glasses, but Löwenherz declined. "With all you fit young men, a doctor doesn't have much of a chance to show his mettle. My job has become that of a psychiatrist." "Psychiatry? I thought you disdained that Jewish science." Hans smiled. "Go back as far as Henry the Navigator, and you'll find that navigation is a Jewish science, but that doesn't mean we can ignore it. If you go back far enough, you'll probably discover that gravity is a Jewish science," said Löwenherz. "That's in order. It's the Luftwaffe's job to ignore gravity." Hans chuckled. "Himmel, you said..." "Was an exhibitionist," said Löwenherz. "Life is a game for me, Victor. If you sat behind this desk, you'd watch the whole panorama of human life pass. Tragedy, humor, honor, disgrace, death and injury. And you reported your suspicions to the CIPO?" persisted Löwenherz. "Mustn't get on the wrong side of the law. Victor, but only last week you said you'd never voted for the Nazis and wished Austria had never come under Nazi control." Hans Fürth leaned well back in his swivel chair. A plump man in his middle 30s, he was Austrian by birth, doctor by training, and airman by conscription. He affected the smart leather zip-front jacket that the flyers liked and many of their youthful mannerisms. His clothes were clean and well-pressed, and his thick black hair was freshly washed and combed straight back. His face was ruddy, his eyes blue, and his small, unnaturally red, girlish mouth was always ready to talk and smile. He smoked his cigar carefully without spilling the ash anywhere except into the ashtray, and he frequently touched his face. running a fingertip along his lips or round his eyes to be sure that everything was in its rightful place. "You're trying to catch me out." "Löwenherz, Victor." He smiled. It was a Viennese affectation to invert the names like that, and today Löwenherz found it an irritating one. Firth levelled his cigar like a javelin between finger and thumb. "I'm a working-class lad. You're an aristocrat. Our sort gave the Nazis little or no support in the old days. Victor, their strength came from the middle-class clerks and unemployed ex-officers. Fertile ground." "Victor, I'm interested in this business with Himmel," said Löwenherz, making one more effort to get the conversation back on his intended lines. "Damned interesting case," agreed Hans Firth. "I've been through his medical dossier again this morning, and I think I've solved the question to some extent." He leaned back like a woman with uncomfortable stays and gave a matronly tug to the bottom of his short jacket. "How?" asked Löwenherz. Firth leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I can't prove it, but it's my guess that he's not racially pure. I was reading in the paper the other day that more Jews commit thefts than Aryans do by a considerable margin. That sounds very unscientific," sighed Löwenherz. The doctor smiled at the window as if he shared a secret with the furnishings. "My dear Baron, you are hardly in a position to deny the effects of breeding. It took 1,000 years of breeding to make you what you are. The Jews... Everyone in the world has 1,000 years of breeding behind them," said Löwenherz irritably. "Perhaps these days Jews have more motive for theft than do Aryans. This is my theory," continued Hans Firth. "We Germans have been bred as a systematic nation, and this fellow Hitler understands us."
We Germans, thought Löwenherz, as he listened to the doctor's sing-song Viennese accent, nibbling the German language like Sachertorte and showing his teeth at every bite. Revolutionize a systematic nation by means of political theory, and you have an instrument. Harness the military caste to that instrument, and you have a weapon. Allow the politicals to have their own armed forces, the Waffen-SS, and create a climate in which they and the military are in constant and dynamic struggle, and then your weapon will conquer the world. "There's still a large piece of the world unconquered," said Löwenherz. "I know," said Firth, smiling and nodding. "It's fascinating to see what will happen." "Like a game of bridge," said Löwenherz.
"Better?" said Firth. "Bridge was never half as exciting. My training as a doctor and as an officer has given me a unique chance to become an expert on the German psychology. Do you know, I can tell what sort of symptoms a man will have according to the rank he holds. For instance, no German NCO would dare to come in here complaining of indigestion, just as few officers come to me with foot ailments. Funny folk." "We Germans? Eh?" "Yes," thought Löwenherz. "And if the Russians get here, then this plausible joker will be occupying some comfortable seat in their military administration, amusing the occupying powers' officers with these same cynical observations on German character and weakness. And they will be laughing and throwing him an extra box of cigarettes and saying, 'Gay fellows, these Austrians. I don't like any sort of unpleasantness. Victor, all I want is to be left alone. And people like Himmel try to involve you. Don't misunderstand me. I like this fellow Himmel, but this isn't an important enough matter for you or me to get involved with. He's an exhibitionist. Victor. Most of the people who get into trouble are exhibitionists." Löwenherz could think of no response. He looked at Firth, who ran his little finger nervously along his eyebrow. "I didn't invent the world or any social system in it," said the doctor. His smile endorsed this disclaimer. "Man is a crafty animal and a vicious one. You'll never alter that." "Victor, don't tell me that your ancestors didn't fight, cheat and kill to win and hold your family estates. I must get along. Hans, I've offended you. No, said Löwenherz. I'm sure you never offend anyone. Löwenherz didn't bring up the matter of Himmel again. He knew that he would merely be treated to glib and elementary generalizations. Speaking as your medical advisor, said Firth, you could do with a couple of days' rest. I can arrange for guns and accommodation, and we'll shoot wild pig. This business has upset me too, I can tell you. I was fond of young Himmel. The mess will buy the meat for sausages. Take you out of yourself. Victor. What do you say? Löwenherz laughed, and this puzzled the doctor. I've arranged all the shooting I can handle at present. Herr Doctor, he said. Thanks all the same. He got to his feet. Perhaps there was a more direct way to handle this business. The alert hut was littered, chairs empty, newspapers abandoned, amendments to operational orders unread, fur-lined jackets unneeded in the warm afternoon sun. By now, Löwenherz had had a chance to think about the dossier. How many influential Luftwaffe officers would be needed to make a protest legal, or at least difficult to punish? The medical officer was obviously scared stiff by Blessing and Starkov. But how many protests had already been made about the experiments? To what extent was opinion already being rallied? Perhaps the document was in the doctor's office because the Luftwaffe Medical Inspectorate was circulating it for comment. Starkov could answer all these questions, but Löwenherz was determined to give no information in return. The phone was best. After all, one could always hang up if the fellow became objectionable. Even from the first moment that he lifted the telephone, he was nervous. His father would have known how to handle this situation, but Victor didn't. On the other hand, his father would not have handled it. He would have left it very much alone. Herr Dr. Starkov, please, he told the operator. There was a short pause. Hello? Von Löwenherz, said the old man. He always used the von. He knew that Löwenherz would think it uncouth, but that amused him. I thought you might give me a call. It was startling that Starkov had guessed who was calling, and Löwenherz needed a moment or two to collect his wits. It's about the stolen dossier. Of course, said Löwenherz. Sent you one through the post, has he? Dear me, can't think why our people failed to intercept that.
Well, you make 15, do? Any idea how many others he sent? No. Pity. Any letter? Said the old man. No? No matter. Are you going to come here and collect it? Nervous, eh? Well, that's all right. Baron, hold on to it until tomorrow. There's no hurry. I have 14 copies here on my desk. There's nowhere really secure that I can lock it, unless I give it to the commandeur to lock in the safe. No, my boy. Don't worry about it. There were nearly 300 copies of that report circulated throughout the medical services. In Nuremberg, there was a conference of 95 scientists discussing the report. Each of them had a copy, and at least 4 were mislaid. So there's no need for you to get too excited about that one copy. So it's been circulated. Did anyone else? Was there? An aeroplane flew low overhead, rattling the windows. Löwenherz was glad of a chance to stop speaking. Starkov said, the Baron has been speaking with young Himmel. I can tell it. No, of course there was no reaction, except that Dr. Rascher was sent Goering's thanks on behalf of the Luftwaffe. He also received a letter of thanks from the medical inspector of the Luftwaffe and many congratulations from his medical colleagues. Löwenherz felt lonely, degraded and sick as his hopes drained away. Was this the way Himmel had felt when talking with him, in the cool, crisp, clean air? If so, Himmel's resolution had not faltered. Did you read the dossier, Herr Doctor? I did. Von Löwenherz. I did. And? What do you want me to say? Von Löwenherz, if you use your brains for one moment, you will realize that I can provoke you with any treasonable or scurrilous statement that I care to invent.
Afterwards, I should merely plead that I did it in my line of duty. Now stop being so foolish. Go back to your aeroplanes and leave this business to me.
You are not interested in my opinions? Not in the slightest. My boy, if you know nothing important, then I shall be wasting my time. If you know something important, I prefer to hear it tomorrow, when the dossier has been officially passed to my department. A dramatic breakthrough today would simply mean promotion for our friend Blessing. While wishing him all the good luck in the world, I am not going to work to secure a promotion for him. Tell me tomorrow. You are returning tomorrow to arrest Himmel? Correct. It will be very quiet and discreet. My paperwork will be in order, and by tomorrow morning you and your friend Cocker will have had time to reconsider your attitude. You'll see the wisdom of cooperating with the law. What will Himmel get? Punishment? Well, that depends.
If he recants, pleads guilty, cooperates with us in respect of helpers, instigators and fellow plotters, or leads us on to a whole network of conspirators, then he will get 10 or 15 years. You don't believe it was a conspiracy? No, I don't. But if he wants to persuade me, I'll listen. He has some Dutch civilian friends in Kroonsdijk that I'm not entirely happy about. They have more than enough butter and schnapps down there in Kroonsdijk village. Some of it is filtering back to your airbase. Himmel could provide me with the chance I need to open up a big black market racket. Löwenherz found the Abwehrman's frankness disconcerting. What if these documents bring Himmel support from influential Luftwaffe officers? We live in a society where influence can be a trump card, said old Starkov cagily. But I'd wager that they'd face execution along with Himmel. Dryly, he added, although I've heard of cases where suicide cheated the law of a high-ranking victim. By now, Löwenherz's carefully prepared arguments had gone dry in his mouth. He felt a strong distaste for this cynical old man who had confidence enough to say things that other men only whispered. You seem very sure of that, my boy. This is what I do for a living. I am not as ambitious as you. I don't want to reform the law or judge its transgressors. I merely bring lawbreakers to justice. If tomorrow your friend Himmel is making the laws and my colleague Blessing breaking them, then I will deliver him to justice with the same calm objectivity. There was a trace of self-mockery in old Starkov's voice. Smug complacency. You mean, said Löwenherz. My very sentiments, said Starkov. I so wish I had the Herr Oberleutnant's fine vocabulary. Good day to you, Feldwebel Herr Doctor. Good day, my dear Baron. The teleprinters in the operations block had been clattering since lunchtime. The message from HQ Bomber Command had gone to the group HQs, and from there the messages reached the airfields, including Warley Fen. Confirming telephoned orders following are executive orders for the night of June 31st. 1943, there followed a gibberish of abbreviations and code words that defined the nature of the attack. Flare colors, air and ground marking, cascade heights and times, turning points, assembly areas, bombing heights and times, bomb loads, and met forecasts giving the predicted winds at the bombing heights and conditions at base airfields at the time of return. Hurriedly, the technical officers began to build the plan into lectures and diagrams that would constitute the afternoon briefing. Flight Lieutenant Giles, the bombing leader, Flight Lieutenant Ludlow, the navigation leader, and John Munro, the squadron commander, conferred. The meteorological expert expressed the doubts that forecasters always have about other men's predictions. The executive orders were as yet communicated only to those who had to know. As an added security precaution, the guardroom had been told to close the main gate and forbid personnel to leave the airfield except with the written permission of the station adjutant. In spite of the gaping holes in the perimeter fence, the embargo was observed by everyone, partly because there was so much work to do that no one could find an opportunity to get away for a lunchtime beer in the Bell. Deprived of the noise and movement of the airmen, the village became as quiet as the airfield was busy. When an attack was being prepared, Even the public bar of the Bell maintained a decorous sobriety. Cynthia Radlett, the barmaid, had wiped the tables, rinsed and polished the glasses, fetched more bottled stout from the cellar, and swept the floor. She looked enviously at the 4 farmers who had been drinking and gossiping ever since lunchtime. Now it was almost opening time again. Those who complained of women chattering could never have listened to farmers talk. It was a good thing that the village policeman was busy out on the green facing Mr. Watt's spin bowling, or he'd be complaining about them drinking after closing time. At last one of the men came to the bottom of his glass. He put it down with a sigh and wiped his lips. "Beans," I told him. "Put in beans. Anything else and the wireworm will eat them." The 3 men nodded and stole a glance at Ben Thorpe. Old Ben's voice was rasping and slow. 10 Acre was always full of wireworm. Are you sure you don't want to walk up to Parsons Meadow? Ben? Nah, said the old man and blew his nose loudly. They could not tell how upset he was, for an old man's eyes are always wet. After the war you'll never know the difference. Nah, snorted Ben. It's the finest piece of grazing for 100 mile. My dad weeded it and dunged it himself for nigh on 50 years, and his dad afore. The old man was crying now. There could be no doubt of it. I shan't watch them plough her up and sow their damned taters there. I'll not live to see her back to grazing again. Wheorf is the old English word for draught animal. Warley meant a place where such animals could graze. Now the war agricultural committees had given grazing to the plough, and one of the few patches of grassland left was the lower end of Trimmer's Meadow that the village used as its cricket field. Today it was only a knockabout match, but towards opening time a small crowd of airmen and villagers gathered outside the Bell. They applauded the batsmen, advised the bowlers, and dozed in the afternoon sun. No previous cricket season could equal this one. Royal Engineers Norwich Depot versus RAF Warley, a flight versus the village. Teams from all over East Anglia came to play cricket on the green, shove halfpenny and darts in the public bar, and drink the Bell's warm bitter. The cricket pitch was smooth and flat, although since it was slightly below sea level it was muddy in wet weather. The RAF had sent carpenters to rebuild the old scoreboard, and the station artist, L.A.C. Gilbert, had supervised its repainting. Sammy Thatcher's shed had been moved and rebuilt. Although it could only hold 1 team at a time, there were no smiles when it was referred to as the pavilion. Today, Bill Beecham, village policeman and domino champion, was the last man batting for the scratch team the village had put up. He hadn't scored for nearly a quarter of an hour, but none of Mr. Watt's spinners daunted him, and he stonewalled with grim determination. The war had brought Police Constable Beecham promotion to sergeant, and when the RAF moved in, he had been officially told to cooperate with the RAF police in matters affecting service discipline and national security. There was even talk of him having a police constable to help him. "Help him home from here on a Saturday night," said Cynthia. And everyone laughed, because like most good jokes, it wasn't a joke at all. The group captain proudly boasted of an unbroken record of friendship between his airmen and the people of the village. Like most official thinking, the group captain's was purely negative. He meant that there were no instances on paper of physical, social, or legal hostilities. On the other hand, there was no great affection either. When a villager announced the arrival of a lorry full of airmen outside the Bell with the remark, "Here come the Wehrmacht," this too was a joke that wasn't a joke. There was still another half hour before the Bell was officially open, but Cynthia took a pint of bitter outside to where Sam Thatcher was working at the base of the ancient oak tree that marked the boundary line. "How is it going?" asked Cynthia. Sam took the head off his pint before answering. "Same as that tree behind Percy's house. It's rotten inside. What a shame." She wiped her wet hands on her apron. "It's getting old, Cynthia. It's probably stood here for 150 years or more." Sam had been drilling deep into the tree and pushing bone meal mixtures into it to feed the wood. He put down his glass and finished plugging up a hole. Will that save it? It will give her another 50 years. Cynthia, you'd better do my governor after you finish this tree. Now, said Sam Thatcher. Don't start. He had no wish to be drawn into the feud between Cynthia and her employer. He looked across the pitch to where Police Sergeant Beecham was still blocking the frantic bowling, and beyond him to the airfield. They're off again tonight. Looks like. And that old wind's going to change, said Sam. Rain? No, not yet a while, or my feet would tell me. But during the night, that wind will swing round and they'll be coming in right over our heads just about the time I'm turning over. Don't say that, Mr. Thatcher. I can't get back to sleep when they wake me. There was a flutter of applause as Bill Beecham was clean bowled. What I don't understand, said Cynthia Radlett, is what they do all day. I mean, they don't go raiding until after we close at night. I know they have to test their aeroplanes in the morning, but what do they do there all day? They have to work out their navigation and decide where to drop their bombs. They do a lot of talking up there at the aerodrome.
Well, I don't know, said Cynthia Radlett, but it's terrible for our business when they go off raiding. It was 5:30. She walked back to the bell and started serving drinks. The most literary and sophisticated officer at Warley Fen was, by common consent, Flying Officer Longfellow. He was, appropriately enough, the intelligence officer, a tall blue-eyed man of 38. In his youth, he had been an amateur boxer of some repute at Cambridge, where he studied classics. After Cambridge, he had worked on a small newspaper in the Midlands and graduated from that to a national daily. He had never excelled at news gathering, but had always been able to provide, at short notice, a couple of thousand words on the College of Cardinals at the death of a pope, helium, airship disaster, or surrealism, record price at Sotheby's, nor was Longfellow too proud to cover a wedding or review a film. In 1936 he left the newspaper's full-time staff and went to live in Cornwall. He became the science correspondent. A few thousand words a month earned enough money to keep himself, his young wife and 2 kids in a small cottage with a view of the sea while he laboured on a book. It was a murder mystery, set in a Cornish tin mine, and although he modestly referred to it as a whodunit, he had inserted the description, a psychological study in depth of the mind of the criminally insane, into the publisher's blurb. The Scotsman found it promising. The Observer thought it had grip, but a left-wing weekly said that handmade, and thus readily identified, liking. Cigarette ends have become a careless vice among the sort of villains who people this year's mediocre detective fiction. He was stuck halfway through a sequel about a carefully organized bank robbery when the war began. Longfellow volunteered. An intelligence officer's special responsibility was the briefing room. At Warley Fen, it was a large wooden hut that could seat 150 aircrew on benches. There was a stage at one end and behind it a map of Europe that stretched the width of the hut. Covering the map there was a red curtain that swept aside at the pull of a string. It had become usual for the station commander to pull the string. Along each side of the hut there were windows. They should have been shuttered at briefing time, but lately the weather had been so fine and warm that they'd been left open. There were the usual "Careless Talk Costs Lives" posters and a notice board with intelligence memos fastened to it with bright red pins. Specially arranged by Flying Officer Longfellow were the "This is your enemy" displays. Photos and 3-view drawings of Bf-110 and Junkers 88 night fighters, as well as some speculative air ministry diagrams of what the newer German fighter planes might look like. From the ceiling hung models of both enemy and Allied aircraft, each one clearly marked with its designation and wingspan. Then there was the accident board with photos of aeroplanes drunkenly askew after sliding off the runway, or with a prop blade eating up a tailplane
after a taxiing collision. At one side of the stage there was the easel standing ready for the Met Department's cloud board, icing cloud in red, non-icing cloud in blue, all stacked to show altitudes. On the other side of the stage, reaching to the ceiling, there was the photo ladder. This didn't denote a proficiency in photography, but showed the accuracy of the bombing. Bomb explosions being plotted from the flashlight photo that each bomber took as its bomb load landed. Lambert's crew were in the top quarter of the ladder, but Flight Lieutenant Sweet's crew were well down. Longfellow was proud of this briefing room upon which he and his clerks had spent so much time and energy. It embodied all the freshness and appeal of a commercial display or a newspaper layout. It was kept up to date every day, and on the notice board there were a world map and a bulletin with a first-class summary of the war on all fronts, as well as a note on yellow paper in which Longfellow attempted to predict the strategic aspirations of the fighting powers. This supposition was clearly headed intelligence guesswork. Often during the day, aircrew would wander into the briefing room, looking at the new displays or leafing through newspapers or copies of Flight, Aeroplane Spotter, TM, or one of the other technical magazines. Longfellow often claimed, "There's not another briefing room in the whole of Bomber Command where the crews pop in and look round when there's no briefing, even if most of them only want to see Jane in the Daily Mirror, doze for half an hour and scrounge a coffee. By the time they wander out again, they could have seen something that will save their lives. Cosily, full of bacon, beans, and fried eggs, a rare luxury. None of them now dozed. The room was full with the crews of all 16 bombers. The men, sitting stiffly upright and white-faced with tension, were waiting for permission to smoke. As the time of danger approached, men grew lonely, and the flyers were dividing into their assigned crews. They exchanged comments and smiles with men they didn't like and had only briefly seen since the previous operational flight 4 days earlier. For now men were drawing close, but not to their friends, but to 6 men who for the next few hours would share their good or fatal fortune. Lambert's 2 gunners, for instance, Binty Jones and Flash Gordon, had a deadly feud dating from over 2 months before. But now they were exchanging jokes just as they'd done in the old days. They had met at the gunnery school and promised each other that they would insist on being in the same crew. They were thick-set young men chosen, like most air gunners, for the short stature that enabled them to fit into the power-operated turrets. Flash was a dark-complexioned, gap-toothed Nottingham miner, a real pitman who'd worked at the coalface on the trickiest seam. His hair was very long, and with the aid of generous amounts of hair cream, he arranged it in long, shiny arabesques. For fear of disturbing its patterns, he would avoid wearing a uniform cap. His liking for gold-plated identity chains, skull and crossbone rings, and white silk scarves, and his unmilitary bearing had given him his nickname. He shared it with a strip cartoon hero of the same patronymic. His wide mouth smiled easily. Digby had said, "He hasn't got a mouth, but a small hinge on the back of his neck." He was, in fact, proud of his white teeth. In spite of being exempt from military service, he'd volunteered on his 21st birthday. He hated the pit. His only ambition was to survive the war and get an office job with a local tobacco factory. He was a cheerful boy with lots of energy and endless questions. He always wanted to know what his fellow airmen did in Civvy Street, and he was not too shy to ask how much they earned doing it. Flash Gordon manned the rear gun turret. Binty, a Welsh milkman, Jones the Milk, was also 21. He usually manned the mid-upper turret, although a few times when Flash had a head cold they swapped Flash often got head colds because, he said, the rear turret heater didn't work properly. Binty had joined the RAF when he was 17, which made him a peacetime airman by a few weeks. He believed that the superiority of the peacetime recruit was manifested by his very short hair, shiny boots and buttons, and razor pleats that he made by treating the inside of each crease with a layer of soap. His smartness was thus virtually unique among the aircrew NCOs. He was not beyond reprimanding airmen and even corporals for minor faults like having a pocket unbuttoned. This made him very unpopular. He affected the old soldiers' vocabulary, sprinkled with mispronounced Arabic and adapted Hindi. Bint was his word for young girl, and he used it frequently, for in spite of an unappealing face, he was a womanizer of renown. He had quick eyes and a brain which he described as shrewd, but which the rest of his crew knew was cunning. However, none of them would allow an outsider to describe Binty Jones as cunning, and they all appreciated that his cleanliness and efficiency extended not only to his sex life and motorbike, but also to his Browning machine guns. Artfully, he had laid a claim to the upper turret, for which there were only 2 guns. Binty and Flash had flown 15 operations, all with Lambert. They had been close pals for nearly a year, drinking, whoring, fighting, and sharing girlfriends, gunnery exam answers, cigarettes, and a 350cc BSA motorcycle, until they had met a woman named Rose in a pub in Peterborough. Her husband was a corporal in the 8th Army fighting in the desert. Flash Gordon said they shouldn't see her anymore, but Binty said she was a sure thing and now spent more nights at her apartment than he did on the base. "No one can have their wives within 40 miles of their base," said Binty, "but station standing orders don't say you can't have someone else's wife." The 2 gunners hated each other, but now you would never have guessed it. Binty sat reading a tightly wadded Beano comic and nodding while Flash told him about a motorcycle that an electrician on a flight wanted to sell for £15. Flash admired Binty's knowledge of motorcycles. A fat fly buzzed and settled on Digby's hand. Even a finger prodded at it failed to move it. "Lazy old bugger," said Digby. "Put him out the window," said Lambert. "He's probably just finishing his second tour." But Digby tipped it onto the floor, and Jimmy Grimm put his boot on it. The briefing was running late. It was already 17:05 hours by the big clock, but half of the chairs on the platform were still empty. The assistant adjutant, Jammy Giles, was there, of course, tipping back in his chair until it nearly fell over, laughing noisily and joking with a group of flyers in the front row. The intelligence officer, Longfellow, was also there. He always arrived early to be sure that his precious charts and diagrams were set up and to check that the route was correctly taped on the big map and the curtains closed upon it. He stood behind Jammy and steadied the chair each time it teetered too far back. But Jammy never toppled over. Jammy was another word for easy or lucky, and Flight Lieutenant Giles was lucky. Outside in the corridors of the operations block there was the clatter of a telex machine as more orders arrived from Group. There was a pungent smell of floor polish and sweet tea, and the clerks were hurrying with last-minute orders and modifications for the briefing officers. Standing in the corner of an empty office in the same block was Wing Commander John Munro, the commanding officer of the squadron, while the group captain had control of the entire airfield from dental surgery to smithy. John Munro commanded the bombers and their crews. Not that either of them would be likely to get into an argument about how things should be done. Air Ministry had carefully delineated their respective areas of responsibility. If there was one man who had stamped this squadron with his personality, it was John Munro. Its faults were his, and its virtues were his, and its skills were his too. Now Munro was tired. There was no need for him to fly on so many raids, but he felt that he must. He flew, and he kept his desktop clear and tidy. He was not among the most popular officers on the station. He knew that, but he was unconcerned. Airmen brought before him knew that they could expect just punishment, but little sympathy. He knew that the men called him Himmler, but he was perceptive enough to know that there was a paradoxical element of respect and affection in the nickname. Monroe's most celebrated virtue was that he spoke to the men coming before him for judgment with exactly the same tone of voice and listened to them with the same degree of attention that he gave the AOC. As one of his gunners had said after they had been badly shot up over Duisburg, "He's not as cool as a cucumber. He's as cold as a bloody iceberg." One night in the mess, Jammy Giles, full of thin beer and hoarse from singing, had pronounced loudly, "Monroe is a gentleman, and gentlemen are now obsolete. This is the age of the technician. The age of violence," P.O. Cornelius Fleming had argued. "Then we should be all right." "Old cock," said Jammy, "seeing as we are the technicians of violence." "But Monroe's a good type, isn't he?" asked Fleming. Jammy suddenly sobered up. "He's all right. Fleming, my boy, men don't come straighter than that tall, thin, humorless, toffee-nosed old sod." Now Monroe was in the vacated office, leaning on his walking stick and puffing at his pipe. Around him there were the engineering officer and 3 senior ground staff NCOs, including Flight Sergeant Worthington. There was a problem. Carter's aeroplane, Joe for King, which had dropped the bomb that afternoon, had developed an electrical fault and would not be serviceable in time for the raid. "Our only reserve is the one that came in this afternoon," said Worthington. "Could do, Mr. Sanderson?" the CO asked the engineer officer, who in turn raised a quizzical eyebrow at the 3 NCOs. "She'll have to go without an air test," said Worthington. "Get your best chaps on it and keep me in the picture, would you?" Sandy nodded assent. "We'll be putting the new flame traps on the exhausts. Permission to bomb her up in the hangar while we work?" Monroe looked at his watch. "No choice, Mr. Worthington. And rip as much of that armor plate out of her as you can manage. It's a long job, sir," said Worthington. "Group's boffins say we get an extra foot of altitude for every pound of weight we lose. We'll leave the armor behind the pilot, sir. I don't think any one of the crew will want you to take that out." "Mr. Worthington," said Monroe with a smile. Worthington saluted and hurried away to round up his bods and break the bad news that they would be working frantically through their mealtime and on through the evening. "Carter to take the new kite. John?" Monroe raked a match into his pipe and spoke with it still in his mouth. 7 trips. Or is it 8? Average pilot. What's his flight engineer like? Sandy? 10 trips actually, Bo, sir. His engineer is Gallagher, apprentice toolmaker, argumentative, thin on theory, but practical enough. They'll be all right. That's settled. Then, shall I tell him? "I'll tell him," said Monroe. "He'll probably be a bit needled." Monroe's own ground crew chiefy was still standing nearby. "What is it, Chief?" The old NCO saluted gravely. "What time will you be doing your air test, sir?" Oh, Lord, he had quite forgotten that he still had his own NFT to do. His poor crew. They had been hanging around all day, and now they would probably have to fly while the rest of the squadron were enjoying the evening meal. Immediately after briefing. Say 18-15 hours. "Very good, sir." Monroe reached into his pocket and looked at the list he had written on the envelope of the letter from his wife. He'd forgotten to put the NFT on it. If he'd seen another officer behaving as he had done over the past 2 months, he would have grounded him without argument. But a commanding officer can't ground himself, in spite of those little talks the quack had given him. There were the lads in the crew, of course, but then they might have been flying with some chap straight from an operational training unit, which would have endangered them even more. It was a problem that would solve itself. Tonight would be his last operation. Next week he was to hand over to a new CO. By the time Monroe reached the briefing room, everyone was there, and the groupie was hovering at the door waiting for the crews to come to attention. Monroe walked to the platform and waited until the room was silent. "Gentlemen, station commander," he called. The crews got to their feet as the groupie's footsteps clicked smartly down the center aisle. He sprang agilely up onto the stage and tossed his gold-encrusted cap into a chair. He smiled, smoothed his white hair, and looked at the great crowd of men as though wondering why they should be standing at attention. "Okay, chaps," he called breezily. "Sit down and light up." But near the front, he saw Tommy Carter's bomb aimer, who had completed 29 trips. Tonight would be his last. For if he returned safely, he would be screened to some safe job for a few months. He was 19. "Collins, have one of mine," said the groupie, and flung him a packet of cigarettes. Collins caught the packet, took a cigarette, and passed them along the line to Carter and the rest of the crew of Joe for King. "Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm passing them down the line." "You saucy bastard," said the groupie. "No wonder they call you Tapper." The sergeant gave a shy smile. There was a roar of delight from the crews, for Collins had earned his nickname from his constant pleas to borrow a few shillings until payday. The groupie smiled. Napoleon, he knew, had used the same simple device to endear himself to his soldiers, and this brilliant fellow in Africa gave away cigarettes by the cartload. So it was said. Not that the group captain was a cynical man. On the contrary, he was imbued with a simple desire to have his air crews like and respect him with the same intense feeling that he had for them. He would have given almost anything to fly with them to bomb Germany. Twice he had flown unofficially as an extra crew member, but the AOC had heard of it and warned him against doing it again. The groupie described himself as a Hun killer. The crews mostly thought of him as a harmless eccentric. In fact, he was a lonely man, desperately trying to believe that the company of youth would offset the approach of old age. He swept the laughter away with a movement of his hand. The crews sat silent, waiting to hear the name of the target. In the few moments before the curtain rises at the opera, there is a sound, a presence, an indefinable and unique mood. The audience are hushed and expectant. Their throats are tight, and even the nervous coughs are shrill and have an overtone of hysteria. Imagine then the mood that would prevail if, like these crews, it was the audience that were about to mount the stage, mouthing their dialogue lest they forget it, noting their cues, worrying about lights and timings, and fussed over by a dozen stage managers who will take the blame should the performance become a disaster. It was a complex, theatrical drama that this audience were about to stage, and one mistake would bring them. Not a boo or a jeer or a poor review, but a sudden, nasty, fiery death. The group captain tugged the cord and the curtains parted with a squeak of metal rollers. "The target for tonight," said the group captain, "is Krefeld in the Ruhr." The captains and navigators had already been briefed, so it was no surprise to them. Many of the engineers had guessed from the fuel loads, and some of the remainder had heard by now, but there were still enough wireless operators and gunners to greet the news with a soft, sincere groan. There had been rumors and bets that it would be a pushover target. Krefeld was no pushover. Happy Valley was Happy Valley, the best defended target zone in Europe. Lambert, Cohen and Mickey Murphy had arrived together from the previous briefings upstairs. Seated behind them were Flash and Binty, the two gunners, and Digby, who was smoking a small cigar. Cohen had his notebook open in front of him. The raid was detailed there in neat handwriting with times in large numbers down one side. Lambert had some notes on the back of an envelope, but he knew he would never refer to it. The routes and details that seemed so baffling to the newcomers were second nature to him. He had seen the techniques grow from the days when they had little more briefing than the name of the target and time of takeoff. On the stage, the technical officers were seated in a line, with the groupie standing like a vicar opening a church fete. Beside him, on a table covered with a grey blanket, there was a carafe of water and a glass. He moved it aside as he always did and turned to the map, beribboned gaily with red and white tapes. The route to and from the target made a squat diamond shape centered upon the North Sea. The enemy coastline was defaced with ugly, red blotches of flak around the cities of Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, while the right-hand tip of the diamond poked into the biggest red patch of all, the heavily defended heart of Germany's heavy industry, the Ruhr, Krefeld, heavy industry, textiles, light industry, communications, reeled off the groupie. It's a big show tonight, over 700 Bomber Command aircraft operating, with leaflet dropping by operational training units, 00130 hours, takeoff 2420. The group captain eyed the 5 journalists and flight lieutenant from Air Ministry press office who had seated themselves quietly at the rear of the room. He spoke to them rather than to the air crews, who had heard it all before. He spoke slowly and deliberately and avoided jargon, as much as one can avoid it when dealing with a series of new techniques that have been named as they were invented. Any target in the Ruhr is difficult to identify. Even though the Met man tells me there will be little or no cloud and a full moon, there will be industrial haze lying over the target area. There always is. Take no chances, chaps. No guesswork. Tonight we are flying as part of the Pathfinder element, and it's important that we put up a good show. Don't bomb or mark out of sequence. One plane can spoil the entire raid, and that means they'll send us back to do the job properly next week. So let's get there and mark it accurately so that the main force can hit it once and hit it bloody hard. The groupie sat down while a ripple of agreement ran round the room. No one wanted to go back next week. Flight Lieutenant Ludlow, the navigation leader, stood up. The shy ex-bank clerk from Guildford had become an actuarial curiosity. He was now on his 3rd tour. Only 2% of airmen survived 3 tours. Some called him the immortal Lud. He had briefed the navigators upstairs an hour before, but now he outlined the route for the sake of the others. As usual, he mumbled so quietly that the crews at the very back couldn't hear properly. But the ones who chose to sit at the very back usually didn't care. Assemble over Southwold on the coast. You'll need little or no change of course until the turning point at Noordwijk on the Dutch coast. There will be yellow markers at the turning point, but don't come back and complain that you didn't see them. They are for the main force boys, and as Pathfinders you're now expected to pinpoint places like that without the markers. Met says there will be no cloud, but if he's wrong, there will be sky markers above the cloud. From there it's straight run down to the target. I'll be placing a yellow 15 miles from the target, and you must go in to bomb over that yellow datum line marker. If you don't, you'll be crossing the bomber stream. By the time you reach the datum marker, navigators must have their ground speed calculated so that captains and bomb aimers have an exact time to the aiming point. That's all. Anyone with queries can see me afterwards. Some of the new boys were scribbling away furiously. Cohen could see P.O. Fleming and his officer navigator checking and rechecking every word of the briefing. The rest of Fleming's crew sat close and watched approvingly as he prepared the spell that would bring them safe through the night. Not all of the crews were together. Sweet always sat at the front with a group of officers. His engineer, Mickey Murphy, sat next to Lambert, just as he had always done. On the other side of Lambert sat Battersby, studying the oil and grease on his hands. He noted with pride that they were fast becoming real engineers' hands like Murphy's. Digby leaned forward to Murphy and Lambert. "Faith, Hope and Charity are writing their memoirs," he whispered. "Yes. I remember what it was like on my first trip," said Lambert. "I was more frightened of making a mistake on my log than of tangling with a night fighter." All of the new crews had arrived in the briefing room at least 5 minutes early. For fear of taking some veteran's allotted seat, they had all stayed close together near the back of the room. Like new boys at school, they were anxious not to attract attention. But when Jammy Giles stood up, it was to this part of the briefing room audience that he addressed himself. Flight Lieutenant Giles was the squadron's assistant adjutant and also its bombing leader, 33 years old. He had joined the RAF during the Munich crisis. He had first flown as a gunner, when any Irk standing around at takeoff could become an air gunner without training or brevet or sergeant's rank. At that time, he had been an LAC, almost the lowest form of Air Force life. Later, when his job had been made official and he'd got 3 stripes, he had delighted in swapping jobs with other aircrew. He had flown as gunner, as wireless operator, and even as second pilot. He had proved particularly skilled at bomb aiming, so much so that at the end of his first tour he had got the DFM and a job as instructor. The discipline at the training school had been so irksome that he had applied for a commission and, to his surprise, got one, now that the importance of his job had been recognized by the creation of the air bomber category. Jammy had become an important man at Warley. The 11 men in the room who had already completed a tour of operations were quieter and more introspective than the newer crews. Jammy was a notable exception. He was noisy, balding, and inclined to plumpness, all due, he boasted, to the vast amounts of alcohol he consumed. Amid a less stringently selected group of men, Jammy's physique would have gone unremarked. Amongst these air crews, however, his slight paunch was Falstaffian, his pate Pickwickian, and his cheerful nose Cyrano-like. This was emphasized by the build of his pilot, Roddy Peterson, a tall, thin, doleful Canadian. He had a dry, savage brand of humor that Jammy had taken to immediately, and now excelled in. Laurel and Hardy, they were often called. Before joining up, Jammy Giles had lived with his mother in a 3-room basement in the London suburb of Morden and worked as a clerk for a building contractor. Now he was a bemedaled officer, a flight lieutenant. It was a transformation beyond his wildest dreams, and he refused to think of what he would do when the war was over. In any case, he didn't expect to survive it. "All right, belt up there and listen," said Jammy. "I don't care how many times you've heard it before." Several times in the past, Jammy had brought some inattentive crew member up onto the stage and asked him to repeat the briefing. Jammy knew how to make such a man feel like an infant. The crews became quiet and attentive. First, the PFF Mosquito aircraft will mark the target with red markers. Their gear is much more accurate than anything we have, so their reds are what the finders must look for. The finders will put long sticks of flares over the reds. Mixed in with the finder aircraft, there are supporters, and these are mostly crews on their first couple of trips who are carrying only high-explosive bombs. That's because incendiaries could be mistaken for red markers. Remember, all you supporter crews, it's your job to shake up the defenses with your HE. Aim at the reds. If you don't see them, I'd rather you brought your loads back here than made a mistake. And don't go round again. Save that for the experienced crews. All right. Next over the target are the illuminators. They will be dropping short sticks of flares right on the aiming point, which they will identify from the light of the finder's flares. Lastly, the primary markers will arrive and put yellow markers down upon the aiming point, which will be lit by the illuminator's flares. Aircraft with Y equipment will check by radar and visual means because the whole main bombing force will be looking for those yellows. It's been carefully planned, lads, so it's up to you to check and double-check before you mark. We don't want any more Pilsons, and there won't be if you all pull a finger out. On April 16th, 1943, a mistake by the Pathfinders resulted in an attack being centered on a huge Czechoslovak lunatic asylum at Dobrany instead of the Skoda arms factory at Pilsen. The horror was compounded by the loss of 36 RAF aeroplanes, and Pathfinder Force was still smarting from the shame of it. There was a flurry of coughs and affirmative grunts. Lambert passed his cigarettes amongst his crew. Mickey Murphy took a cigarette. "What do you think, Sam?" he asked. "It sounds carefully planned," said Lambert guardedly. "That's what they say about contraception," said Mickey, and smiled to reveal his gap teeth. He smiled at Battersby too. The boy grinned back, pleased to be included in the joke. Upon the stage, Jammy continued. All right. The last wave are backers up. You are carrying green TIs. First look for any remaining reds because they are from the mosquitoes. If there are no red TIs, look for yellow ones from the primary markers. I'll be there watching you with my beady little eyes, and if any of you mess up my pretty pattern of coloured lights, I'll have your guts for garters. All right? The crews laughed, and Jammy gave a brief guffaw. He always said that at the end of his briefing. A new joke would have worried them. At this time, they preferred things that were old and familiar. All right. One more thing, said Jammy. Jettisoning of bombs. In recent months, there's been a greater tonnage of bombs dropped on Britain by us and the Yanks than by the whole bloody Luftwaffe. There was a pandemonium of whistling and catcalling. Jammy waved it down. Yeah, it's a real laugh at briefing, but when you are holding up a mainline train service or asking the poor buggers at bomb disposal to clear up your mess, it's not so funny. If you must jettison, I want exact times. Map reference and fusing details immediately after landing. It's easy to get away with it by saying nothing, he smiled, and that's why I'll press for disciplinary action against the whole crew that doesn't report jettisoning. They were all in a good mood now. That's it, Jammy. Give 'em hell, shouted someone. Again, Jammy gave one of his sneeze-like laughs. As the intelligence officer got up, it was quiet enough to notice the sounds of the countryside. Outside the window, a chestnut tree moved abrasively. Swifts called. A blackbird sang, and thrushes were learning how to fly. The scent of newly cut hay came on the warm breeze. It was hard to believe that here in this pastoral backwater plans were being made to destroy a town. Longfellow had been watching and listening to the briefing with the close attention of a journalist. The drama of the scene moved him. This was history being made. Last week he had sent these men out to destroy Cologne. Cologne. Why, it was beyond belief. 1,000 years of history shattered into fragments in less than 2 hours by these young kids. Like a chapter he'd written for his second book, his criminals had sat around in easy chairs drinking brandy and discussing in matter-of-fact tones their plan to rob a bank. He'd rewrite that chapter, because now he knew that it hadn't been matter-of-fact enough. This was how it really should be. Young fellows, some still in their teens, offering each other cigarettes and making notes about how many tons of high explosive they would plant in a city centre. Longfellow got to his feet slowly to make sure he had their attention. He ran his hand through his thick, black hair. "Can you see me at the back?" he called. There was an affirmative murmur. "I'm surprised to hear it. I can't see you through this damned fug." There was some polite laughter. The room was blue with tobacco smoke and the yellow lights. He noticed, glowed through the swirling fumes like distant igneous planets. He made a note of distant igneous planets. That would do for the book. Longfellow's clerk pinned up a bombing pattern diagram headlined, "Creep Back." It was a long blob of bomb hits extending to meet an arrow marked "Bomber Stream, Line of Flight." Longfellow put on his spectacles and stared at the diagram. This made his whole audience look at it. "Tonight," pronounced Longfellow slowly and clearly, "we are attacking Krefeld. The heavy industry—" He was unable to continue because of the noise, which was getting louder. There was a shrill laugh from Kit Pepper, one of Sweet's gunners, and a sudden hand clap from Roddy Peterson next to him. Longfellow held up his hand and then loudly corrected his error. "Tonight, gentlemen, you are attacking Krefeld." There was another sort of noise now, quieter and mollified. He decided to skip the build-up description of the target and go on to the matter of his real concern, the one that the intelligence people at Group were complaining of so bitterly. In a word, creep back. "Now, you back her up, crews," said Longfellow, turning back to them. "It's your job to drop your new flares into the center of the existing flares. I've said this 1,000 times, but I will repeat it once again. When you see the marker pattern on your approach, you are seeing it in perspective. That foreshortening is an optical illusion, so don't drop short of center. Creep back is this tendency to fall short and then shorter still, so don't do it. He paused long enough to give importance to his next few words. Now you chaps know as well as I do, there is another reason for creep back, one that people are reluctant to mention. He paused again. Plain old-fashioned cold feet. The room was silent. No one coughed or murmured. Longfellow had their fearful attention. The groupie looked towards the journalists, but the smoke was too dense for him to see their reaction. Longfellow continued, "When the flak is coming up hard and heavy, you get itchy fingers. What you want to do is to get rid of your bombs and get the hell out of there." "Of course you do, but if you are going to drop your bomb load in a field of potatoes, then what the hell are you going all the way to Germany for? That last few 100 yards to your aiming point, gentlemen, is the difference between tearing the Hun's guts out and throwing in the towel." He took off his horn-rimmed spectacles and replaced them in a theatrical gesture. Longfellow had theories about briefings, the cold accusation of cowardice, followed by a manly understanding tone, a logical argument, and the final sporting allusion was calculated to shock, stimulate and reinforce the determination of his audience. "Rule Britannia!" shouted someone at the back. "These armchair warriors," murmured Digby. "They'll fight to the last drop of our blood." Battersby giggled nervously. Impulsively, Flight Sergeant Lambert stood up. It was the first time he'd ever asked a question at a briefing. "What are the guts of Krefeld?" asked Lambert. "What are we aiming at in that city centre?" He had a target map in his hand. He waved it. This wasn't so good, thought Longfellow. He ran his fingers down the back of his hand like a man adjusting the fit of a pair of chamois gloves. He peered forward to decide what sort of man this was. He tried to see his eyes, but the ceiling lights threw the fellow's eye sockets into darkness and masked his expression as efficiently as a pair of dark glasses. He smiled nervously at Lambert and remembered the standard answer he'd prepared for this sort of question. Sometimes the crews got fidgety about dropping their bombs right into the center of crowded towns. It was natural that they occasionally needed bolstering up a little. Longfellow held up a target map of Krefeld and tapped the center of it. "A Gestapo headquarters and a poison gas factory. That's your aiming point." "All right." He felt the mood of the room change as he said it. There was a suppressed muttering and a heightened excitement. The element of anger that a moment ago had been directed so unjustly at him was now turned upon the real enemy, Krefeld. The group captain preferred not to wear his spectacles except in the privacy of his office. He didn't look at Lambert directly. He closed his eyes and nodded wisely, as though he had known about that city centre too. Other technical officers continued the briefing. Sandy Sanderson, squadron engineer, was wearing an expensive blue lambswool roll neck, and as he spoke of the fuel loads, he kept peering to see if there were any women among the journalists. The gunnery leader said that Lancasters were still coming back with damage by 303-inch bullets. British bullets, that means trigger-happy gunners firing at shadows. Keep awake, keep alert, and keep the turrets moving so that the oil stays warm and thin. But remember that there are 2 motor bombers with us tonight. So don't open fire until you positively identify the night fighter. The signals leader gave details of the splasher frequencies, a rapid change of frequencies for bearings from beacons, and then the Met man gave them an outline of the weather situation. His curving line of cold front was in places 200 miles in error, and his prediction of its midnight frontal positions was even more inaccurate, but it would make no difference to these crews, who were going only as far as the Ruhr. There they would find anticyclonic weather as predicted. Moon full, rising, 30 hours at target, 1 hour before zero. Sunrise is 6 hours, so you won't have to worry about sunup. Now the cloud along the enemy coast, there will be some well-broken layer cloud. The residual thundercloud will have followed the cold front and won't affect you. Over the target area, you'll have a very thin layer of medium cloud between 1,000 and 20,000 feet. Sorry, I can't be more precise than that, but it'd be cool. But it will probably have cleared by 100 hours. Jesus, said Digby, without lowering his voice. We're going to be dancing naked in the full moon, and he consoles us that we needn't worry about sunup. Loudly, he said, "Anyone want to buy my wristwatch?" There were a few laughs. Even if the Met man didn't hear Digby's exact words, he interpreted the sentiment without difficulty. Hurriedly, he added, "You'll have enough stratocumulus at 2,000 to 3,000 feet to give you some cover. Visibility moderate. The bases will be the same. Stratocumulus at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Visibility's moderate. You've had your winds? Navigators, northwest wind over target, remember. See me afterwards if there's anything else." The last man on his feet was Wing Commander Monroe. The squadron CO, young Tapper Collins, wasn't the only man who was completing his tour of operations that night. John Monroe was also embarking on his final trip of the tour, with the difference that this was Monroe's second tour. Tonight was his 60th bombing raid. Monroe spoke in the carefully modulated tones of the British upper class. "Not much to say tonight, gentlemen. Flak concentrations, the map speaks for itself. You are routed to bypass these unfriendly regions, so don't wander off or invent some new route that you believe to be better. Keep in the stream and you'll avoid most of these red patches." Sweet called out, "What about a route that avoids that big red patch?" The big red patch was the Ruhr, so everyone laughed. The wing commander smiled as broadly as he knew how to. "Keep in the stream, chaps, and watch your bombing heights. The only collision danger is over the target, and if you keep to your height band, it is almost eliminated. Don't run across the target except from the northwest where the datum marker is. It's rather like driving a car in traffic. Keep on your side of the street and you are perfectly safe. But drive across the traffic stream and the chances of colliding are considerable." His audience, few of whom had ever driven a car, nodded knowingly. "And no evasive action over target. There'll be no night fighters there when the flak is firing. Once you're clear, keep to the return route and timing. This is a well-planned show. Chaps, it's a big raid, about 700 aircraft, with Lancasters, Wellingtons, Halifaxes and Sterlings." "Hooray!" shouted a dozen old-timers from the back of the room. Monroe looked up and smiled. On recent raids, 12.9% of the Sterlings had been lost, compared to only 5.4% of the Lance. If it comforted them to know the poor old Sterlings would be with them, lumbering slowly along at their feeble ceiling and drawing the brunt of the flak, why should he spoil it? But his young brother was piloting a Sterling this night, and the smile was a mask. When the briefing ended, there was a clatter of boots and a buzz of conversation as the flyers shuffled out through the door and into the golden world of the afternoon sun where the air smelled of newly cut grass. Monroe buttonholed Flight Lieutenant Sweet near the door. "A word to the wise, well, Mr. Sweet. These crew reshuffles, bad biz. If any of them want to change crews, tell them to come and see me." "You mean Cohen and Digby?" "I mean Cohen and Digby." Sweet smiled winningly. They were requests. Digby asked if,
Before you go on, old chap, let me tell you that this afternoon I had Flight Sergeant Digby, Royal Australian Air Force, on my neck, flushed with the exertion of hard pedalling around the Perry track, flatly refusing to leave Lambert's crew. These chaps get superstitious, you know. We can't win a war on superstition. Oh, I wouldn't go so far as that. Oh, old Hitler's been using it pretty strenuously and gaining quite a bit of ground. The old torchlight processions and secret signs, eh? No. If these chaps get comfort from their toy bears and lucky lingerie hanging by the windscreen, let them have it. I say, that goes for crewing too. But that's mutiny, isn't it? Surely Flight Sergeant Digby should have come to me in the usual way if he thinks he's running B-Flight. I can see you haven't had much experience of our Australian allies, Mr. Sweet. I'm damned lucky he demeaned himself to mention it to me.
There are quite a few of his countrymen who would have been on the blower to Australia House and done it via their Prime Minister and ours if they thought they were being victimised. You're joking, sir. I wish I were. Don't know how. In fact, my trouble, I suppose. Anyway, Mr. Sweet, forget Digby going to your crew, even if he is the best bomb aimer in the squadron. And even if your bomb aimer is by far the worst. Sweet smiled again. Oh, it wasn't for that reason, sir. Sweet touched Monroe's arm in a gesture of reassurance. Monroe shrank away. He had a horror of men patting his shoulder or grasping his arm. Whatever reason, Mr. Sweet, forget it, he said coldly. Take Cohen, forget Digby. Take Cohen, forget Digby. That's the spirit. Ashamed of his reaction to Sweet's gesture, Monroe leaned a little closer to him. Perhaps your idea is to pile all the B-flight duds into one crew in order to get them reassessed as unsuitable for Pathfinders and transferred. But why, Sweet? Why in the name of God choose Lambert's crew? Lambert's one of the best pilots on the squadron. Sweet smiled at Monroe. He felt sure that he would be able to convincingly refute this unfair suggestion. All I'm interested in, sir, is flying maximum ops with maximum bomb loads and killing maximum Huns. Really? Said Monroe. I just want to get the war over, said Sweet. Quite a few of us feel like that, said Monroe, and before Sweet could reply, added, Another question. Sweet, has Lambert had a portrait of Stalin painted on his aircraft? Stalin, sir? Stalin, that's it? No, sir, that's Sergeant Carter's aircraft, L. Love. That's what I thought. Group captain came your way this PM to see the aircraft with the bomb release malfunction. He saw the comrade's portrait on it. He's fretting. I'll have the riggers paint it out. And have one of your chaps write to the Daily Mirror about it? No. I wouldn't advise that. As you know, it's unserviceable tonight. Do nothing until the group captain mentions it to you directly. Then you will have a problem. I'll think of a way to deal with it. Sir, Sweet smiled. I'm sure you will, said Monroe coldly. Who could say that youth was rebellious? Why? Chaps like Sweet would do anything to avoid a harsh word. Monroe sighed. After the war, he felt, the world might be full of Sweets, selling their vacuum cleaners, parrying political questions and entertaining millions on television. Eventually, everyone in the world would become expert at the modest words, kind smiles and bland assurance that gloved the iron hand of ambition. Man, frightened that machines might dominate him and overawed by mechanical performance, was becoming mechanical in his emotions and reactions, thought Monroe. His gestures, jokes and obedience were robot-like. Lambert's foolish and provocative question, much as Monroe deplored such behavior, was at least human by the very nature of its error. That smiling little Flight Lieutenant Sweet would never do such a thing. Sweet wasn't the only person to be buttonholed. All over the room, men were giving last-minute warnings, greetings, advice and information to friends and strangers. The chaplain was a member of the Socialist Party and secretly regarded himself as a rather dangerous reformer. In his opinion, this was why his bishop had been so keen to get rid of him into the Air Force. Compulsory church parades, some articulate atheists in the officers' mess, and an inherited stutter had made his task harder than he'd expected. Still, it was his duty to seek out the troubled, and he found the man with the lined eyes who'd almost spoiled the whole briefing by disquieting his comrades. "Are you troubled, Flight Sergeant?" he asked Lambert. "Why doesn't the church stop the war, Padre?" The young chaplain had listened carefully to his archbishop. So, like the intelligence officer, he had the answer ready. "The war is due to the sin of mankind, including our own. And so we have got to do it and be penitent while we do it. So I'm the right hand of God, Ma. Am I? Padre? I wonder if the Germans have padres telling them they are. For one moment, the padre's resentment and anxiety almost betrayed him into praying that he would not stutter. He did stutter. I hold the King's commission, Sergeant, and I'll ask you to treat me with the respect my uniform deserves. Come on. Skip, called Digby loudly. We've got some killing to do. The padre glared at them both. Why should these men insult me, he thought. They know I can't stop the war. Pay no attention to them, Padre, said Longfellow. They couldn't care less about decent people's feelings. He wondered whether it was either of those two who had laughed at him when he made that slip of the tongue at the start of the briefing. Once Longfellow had hero-worshipped the young aircrew, but that was long ago during the Battle of Britain. That was before he encountered the arrogance that constant danger granted the young. Intrepid birdmen, he said scornfully after all the birdmen were out of earshot. Walter Reisman often recalled the day when his name had been put forward for the job of burgomaster. It was a job for life. But he anticipated that 2 hours a day would be more than sufficient to supervise the civic activities of such a small town. That was before the war, of course, when the world went at a slower pace. Decisions about slum clearance and extensions to the gasworks were referred to subcommittees, and the answers were seldom in dispute. Walter Reisman had been made burgomaster because of his long and faithful membership of the party. Now that the nation was at war, his primary job was to ensure that Altgarten played its part in winning it, and that took him 8 hours a day of paperwork and meetings, with frequent visits to anywhere and everywhere to be sure that the air raid precautions were provided as the law demanded. At first, the hospital authorities and the TENO engineers commander had resented his sudden, unannounced arrivals. Soon they realized that Reisman had influence in the party far greater than his post as burgomaster of Altgarten would suggest. He also had an honorary rank in the SS. So they learned how to put on a show of welcome when the tall white-haired man appeared like a ghost in the middle of the night. It was part of the briefing of any new sentry, night watchman or caretaker, to be on the alert for the burgomaster. The Rathaus was a red brick building that faced Altgarten railway station across the grassy, tree-lined Bismarckplatz. From his office, the burgomaster looked down upon the war memorial. The fountain splashed brightly in the afternoon sunlight. On the face of it were the names of 40 Altgarten men who had died in the First World War. Already the side panels were almost full with Second World War casualties, and the burgomaster wondered whether the base of the fountain would be suitable for carving more names. He decided it would have to be. The burgomaster had seen many changes in the Rathaus since he had taken office. The basement, which had once housed the birth, marriage and death records, had been turned into an air raid control room. There was a gas curtain at the door, emergency lighting with its own generator, a large-scale map of the town and a smaller-scale one to show its position in the district. Phones connected the room to the police, fire, gas, electricity and water officials in various parts of the town, and there were special lines to the rescue and repair service and to the senior air raid precautions officials in Dortmund. Official visitors to Altgarten were always taken to see the control room, and Herr Reisman was very proud of it. Although some of the ruder clerks called it the Eagle's Burrow, his office had been moved up to the top floor along with the marriages, births and deaths registry and the housing department. Artfully, they had put benches in the corridor outside the marriage registry, so they had been able to convert the waiting room into the office of the burgomaster's clerk, Andy Niels, a solemn young man with a gastric ulcer which, together with a certain amount of string-pulling by the burgomaster, had released him from army service. Downstairs there were the tax, street cleaning and ration card offices, and the east wing of the building was given over to the police. although the Oberwachtmeister had his office on the same floor as the Burgomaster so that he was available for conference. The Burgomaster went next door to his assistant's office, noting with satisfaction that in the corridor sandbags and a rope, axe and stirrup pump had been placed according to his most recent order. His clerk's office was smaller than the Burgomaster's and was crammed full with filing cabinets, but he envied his clerk the view he commanded. From this window he could see the tall spire of the Lieberfrau rising from the medieval roofs of the town centre, beyond, where the open country began. There was the Wold Hotel, tucked into a patch of dark woodland. And to the north, catching the sun, were 4 long glass houses that were a part of Reyesman's own property. He was still enjoying the view when his assistant came into the room. He was startled, and to Reyesman's surprise, he flushed. "Herr Reyesman," said the clerk politely, "is there something you require?" "No," said the Burgomaster, watching with amusement as the clerk hurriedly pushed the files he was holding into the nearest filing cabinet. By the time he turned back to the desk, he was more collected. "Today is my birthday, as you well know since you have been sending the invitations. I wanted to ask you to join our party this evening at Frenzel's. The Herr Burgermeister is very kind," said Andy Niels. "I shall be honoured." "It's a small affair," said the Burgomaster. "This is no time for ostentatious display, but there will be smoked eel to start and Frenzel's special roast duckling to follow." The Burgomaster was puzzled by the young man's behaviour. Usually a relaxed and self-composed fellow, today he seemed anxious and neurotic. He straightened a picture on the wall, wiped dust from a shelf, and moved around the room. Perhaps his ulcer was playing up, thought Reyesman. "If you will excuse me, Herr Burgermeister," he said. "You have an appointment with your tailor, and I have a meeting too." "I was forgetting the time," said the Burgomaster. He nodded to Niels and left the room. Outside in the corridor there were 5 people. At first, the dark clothes of the older people suggested that they had come to register a death. Probably, thought Reyesman. They have these same clothes for weddings, births and deaths. It was the young couple who showed that this was a wedding. There was no doubt about them. They were so clearly in love that they were oblivious of everyone and everything around them. The young man was dressed in a dark, well-cut suit with a small spotted bow tie. He was a handsome boy with big eyes and a strong jaw. There were not so many young men like that still in civilian clothes, thought Reyesman. The girl was pretty. She did not have the wide pelvis, heavy bones and strong arms that were common to the local girls. She was petite, with jet-black hair cut short and a heart-shaped face that was pale and doll-like. The parents shuffled uneasily as Reyesman walked down the corridor. Here in the country, older people had never lost their fear of authority, thought Reyesman, and that perhaps was a good thing. Young people were less respectful, and as he passed he heard someone whisper, and the young man looked up and stared him straight in the face. Perhaps if the Burgomaster had been busy that afternoon he would have never pursued the matter or come across it in the first place. But the afternoon was quiet and sunny as he sat at his desk, idly turning over the carbons of letters passing between departments in the Rathaus. Dear Sir, the Burgomaster thanks you for your letter of the 12th of May and confirms that Meyer Hans Willi of Rhine-Provinz Altgarten Florastrasse 36 is now officially down-classified to Jew of 2/3 Jewish blood. Your department will ensure that his employer is informed and that any privileges that he had due to his former status as a Jew of 1/3 Jewish blood should now be withdrawn. A. Niels for the Burgomaster. Niels had initialed the carbon, as was his usual practice. Acting on impulse, the burgomaster phoned through to police records and asked them for their file on this man, Hans Willy Meyer. "You have it already," said the police constable. "You are sure?" "I am certain, Herr Bürgermeister. Herr Niels came down for it personally. He said you had asked for it. Thank you. Is everything in order?" "Yes," said the burgomaster. He knew the man with whom he had spoken, an elderly constable who had been put in charge of records after being badly injured in a fight with two drunks at the beginning of the war. He was a man of experience and would have made no mistake. The burgomaster picked up the phone but replaced it and walked along to Niels's office instead. The wedding party was still waiting in the corridor. Niels was not in his office, and although at first Reisman was about to dismiss the matter from his mind, he had second thoughts and went through the cabinet to find Meyer's police file. It was not there. There were in fact none of the grey-covered police files anywhere in the cabinet. It was then that he remembered that Niels had been carrying a grey file when he had come into the office and found Reisman behind his desk. Yes, there it was, stuffed into a cabinet of purchase agreements so carelessly that its cover was bent double. The burgomaster read through the file of documents. Meyer was a 21-year-old Jewish farm worker. He was not permitted to serve in the Wehrmacht. His file was a very ordinary one that could have been that of any of Algarten's 24 Jews. Reisman had hoped that his data card with its identity photo and fingerprints would have been there, but it was not. Perhaps police records filed them separately. Meyer had been downgraded because his grandfather, a butcher from Lübeck, hitherto listed as an Aryan, had now been classified as purely Jewish. This made Meyer's father 2/3 Jewish like his mother. And, as everyone knew, the offspring of two such Jews was a 2/3 Jewish son, not a 1/3 Jewish son. What puzzled Reisman was where the information had come from. Usually, in cases of this sort, one found in the file a short, unpleasant note from a neighbor or fellow worker, typed sometimes, or written in block capitals to conceal the writer's identity. Often they contained obscenities. Sometimes they ended with Nazi slogans instead of a signature. This file had no such note. The grandfather had been dead since before the party came into power, and these documents had originated with the Lübeck Police Records Office. It seemed unlikely that they would have made a mistake, but then perhaps in 1933, the first year of Hitler's power, they had been overworked. For that was when all these Jewish files began. Before that, the police had dealt only with criminals. It was time to go for his fitting. He replaced the file as he had found it, even bending it as before. As he left his office, he saw the wedding party again. They were no longer tense, and the bridegroom held his wife's hand protectively. Herr Hollander, the registrar, brandished a huge bunch of keys and used them to unlock the cupboard on the landing. He reached for one of the hundreds of black-bound volumes that lined its shelves. The ceremony was not yet complete, and Hollander looked the groom in the eye warningly. They were hushed and solemn as Hollander handed the official edition of Mein Kampf to the bride, as was mandatory in all Reich weddings. The burgomaster nodded approvingly at them as he passed. The sun now shone from a clear blue sky, and Reisman enjoyed the walk up Dorfstrasse past the ruined windmill on the corner. As he crossed Vogelstrasse, he could smell the sweet, freshly cut timber in the carpentry shops where as a young child he had lingered on his way to school. He tried to forget the business of Meyer, but he could not. Even as the tailor, old Herr Voss himself, supervised the fitting of his fine party uniform, he remembered it again. What sort of spiteful motive was behind the reclassification? Not that Reisman had much sympathy for Jews, it was simply a matter of procedure. If there was a reclassification, then the file should show the evidence for it. If the reclassification had been upwards instead of downwards, then Reisman would have suspected corruption. It did happen, It was useless to deny it. There were such large sums of money involved. Some of them would offer a fortune rather than go into a concentration camp. It wasn't fair that these Jews put that sort of temptation to loyal policemen and party workers. But what could you expect from such people? "Raise your arm," said Herr Voss. "Too tight?" "Exactly right. Bend forward and straighten up." The burgomaster did so, and Herr Voss fussed around the back of his collar, slashing at the soft brown cloth with his chalk. It was a smart uniform. He wished it had been ready this morning when the family had had its group photo taken. How fine his mother had looked even at 86. And the children in their best suits had been transfixed and silent in case the photo should show them as having moved. For their parents had promised them dire punishments if this photograph for grandfather's birthday was less than perfect. "Sit down! Clothes must look as well on a man seated as upon him standing." Again he applied the sharp edge of the chalk. It was an honor to be fitted by Voss himself. Voss was among the wealthiest men in the town. In 1930, in an upstairs room in this very building, he had first tried his hand at making a uniform. It was for an old and valued customer who had just joined the SA. One of his fellow officers had admired it, and by 1933, Voss uniforms had become famous for miles around. One wealthy SS officer came from Berlin and had previously been a customer of the famous Stechbath, Goering's tailor. It made Voss very proud to be. Some people said things against them. But the Nazis had done wonders for the uniform business, whatever other faults they might have. There were so many part-time organizations that many Germans had 2 or 3 uniforms. Voss's greatest complaint against the Nazis was the way they had deprived him of his skilled Jewish staff. It was all very well. These arrogant young men complaining about stitching and the cut of the breeches. They didn't seem to understand that there were secrets to tailoring a pair of breeches that were known to very few cutters. And they were all Jewish. "Stand up!" It was almost as though the burgomaster had read Voss's mind. He said, "Are there many Jews still in the tailoring business?" "Yes." "Herr Bürgermeister," said Voss, "I still have one cutter downstairs, and there are certain lining materials which can be obtained only from Jewish concerns in the Netherlands. Now, take this lining in your tunic." "I don't wish to know about it," said the burgomaster hurriedly. "I was asking in case you have heard of a person named Meyer, Hans Willi Meyer." "I don't recall the name." "Herr Bürgermeister. But my cutter Jakob might know. Shall I fetch him?" "Yes," said the burgomaster. Poor Jacob. He came into the room in answer to old Mr. Voss's call and found the burgomaster in his full party uniform. For a moment he completely forgot that this was the very garment he had been handling only an hour before, and went white with horror. "There's nothing to fear, Jakob," said Voss. "There's nothing to fear, Herr Bürgermeister, is there?" he added. "Nothing," said the burgomaster. "I merely wondered whether you knew a young man named Hans Willi Meyer. He lives in Florastrasse."
"No, Herr Bürgermeister, said Jakob. "It will not mean trouble for him," promised the burgomaster. "I promise it upon my word as a German officer." "You are sure, sir?" Voss said. "Of course." Jakob. All these Jews were suspicious. Why couldn't they behave like patriots? "The fellow has been denounced," declared the burgomaster dramatically. "Tell me what you know of him. It can only help." There were so few Jewish families left in Altgarten that it was foolish to deny that he knew young Meyer. "He is a fine young man," said Jakob. "His family comes from Lübeck. He works on a farm. It means catching a bus at 5:30 a.m. When did you first know him?" The burgomaster offered Jakob a cigarette. The Jews didn't get a tobacco ration or a meat ration either, and Jakob dearly loved to smoke. "I lived near his parents in Lübeck," said the old tailor. He took a cigarette, but stored it carefully away. "His father's parents were Jewish?" "No, both his father's parents were Aryan.
It was just his mother's mother who was Jewish. Are you quite sure? I am quite sure. Herr Bürgermeister. There was so much talk about it. Jakob gave a short laugh. His father was one of the most prosperous pork butchers in Lübeck. Reisman smiled. So this fellow Meyer is only 1/3 Jewish. For you, perhaps, Herr Bürgermeister, said the old tailor. For me, he is not Jewish at all. The thing that still puzzled the Burgomaster was the way in which this Jewish fool Meyer had signed the reclassification form. It was almost as if he wanted to be down-classified. See the shoulder, Jakob, high when the Herr Bürgermeister is seated, but straight when he stands? Reisman was irritated that they should talk of him as though he was deformed, like surgeons rather than tailors. And that's the way they looked at him too. Are you finished? Yes. Thank you. Herr Bürgermeister, the day after tomorrow for another fitting. We must have it exactly right. My secretary will phone, said Reisman. Is he well? Asked Voss. Niels? Said Reisman. He smiled. He was when I left him an hour ago. I thought I saw him going into the front entrance of the hospital, said Voss. I wondered whether he was sick or just visiting. You were mistaken, said the Burgomaster, but his voice lacked conviction. Young Niels had not been his usual self today, and there was the strange business of the hidden dossier. Perhaps he was sick. Perhaps he was in hospital. From the window of Voss's office, he could see the grey brick St. Antonius Hospital, and beyond it, the flat roof of the annex building. For a moment he was tempted to use the phone and ask the reception if they had admitted Niels, but he decided that if Niels was in hospital, the rat house would have phoned him here at the tailor's to report it. The Burgomaster was wrong on both items. At that moment, Andy Niels, personal secretary to the Burgomaster of Altgarten Psumme, was occupying a bed in room 28 on the top floor of the silent annex building. Originally, the annex had been intended as an overflow for St. Antonius, solely to cater for Altgarten's increased population, but under the new hospital zoning arrangements, it was used to receive air raid casualties from badly bombed cities in the Ruhr. From here they were dispersed as soon as possible, and the beds made ready for the next contingent of casualties. It was a stroke of genius to build the training centre for Samariter nursing assistants between the hospital and the amputee camp. The poor little girls worked until they dropped, especially on those awful days when convoys of the new bus-like ambulances were jammed along Joachimstrasse so that air raid victims from the Ruhr were lying in corridors for want of bed space. Samariter, with only a couple of weeks' training, found themselves working in the operating rooms or casualty wards. On the days when there were no RAF raids, the Samariter worked almost as hard in the amputee centre across the road. At any time of day or night, the nurses' accommodation wing of the training centre was dark, with a silence marred only by the snores and nightmares of the exhausted girls. There were many young girls in Altgarten, Red Cross nurses, Frey sisters, Brown sisters and Samariter. The tea rooms and hairdressers vibrated with their chatter, and the inhabitants of Altgarten were never at loss for a story about their shameless activities. Once a month there were dances at the training centre. Tenno officers, SS men from the walled hotel training camp, and certain local residents received neatly penned invitations and displayed them like honours. All three of the town's hairdressers could be certain of one ticket. So could the haberdasher and an old man named Drews, who regularly obtained bolts of silk and linen from some secret source over the border. For obvious reasons, the senior staff at Kessel's brewery were asked, and the Burgomaster's office received a ticket as a matter of courtesy. Andy Niels used that ticket. Tonight there was to be a dance at the training centre. The girls had decorated the assembly hall with coloured papers and cardboard representations of Mount Fuji. On the tickets it had hopefully said, "Fancy dress with a theme of old Japan," but only the most enthusiastic girls had sewn together a costume. "The old fool invited me to his birthday dinner," said Andy Niels. "What the devil can I do?" "Couldn't you get away early?" said the nurse. She was a short, plump, sexy girl who giggled readily at any situation. She giggled now. "There'll be toasts to his father, the regiment, Officers who fell in the First War. Then we'll listen to speeches and sing old war songs. You've no idea what it's like. There'll be food at the dance. The girls have been saving their rations for 3 weeks. No matter, said Niels sadly. We'll go to Dusseldorf this weekend and stay in a fine hotel. And share a room? Said the nurse. She giggled. They will ask for our papers. I can fix that. Have you inherited some money? As a matter of fact, I have, said Niels. He turned over in bed and reached down to her. You've left your stockings on, he accused, just in case. The door's locked, and no one will come up to the top floor during the day. I'll take them off, said the girl, but I must be back on duty by 5. She climbed out of bed again. By 5 I must be in my office, said Niels. I've left lots of work there. He watched her take off her stockings and suspend a belt. She knew he was watching her, and she moved in a deliberately provocative way, knowing that his impatience would put an edge on his appetite. Niels breathed heavily. My God, he thought, I'm going to miss all this next week. After August Bach had driven away, Anna Louisa busied herself in the house and garden. She scrubbed the kitchen floor, boiled down oddments of soap and cleaned out the chicken house. At 4 o'clock, she met Hansel at the Volksschule and walked him past the fire station. Both of the Magirus fire engines were outside, and he watched intently as the equipment and paintwork was shined to a high gloss. The firemen were accustomed to the Volksschule boys and Johannes Ilfer. The Gruppenführer, on the number 1 engine, recognized Hansel and lifted him up to see the driver's seat. For months he had seen Anna Louisa meeting the child from school. One of his friends had teased him about concealing a secret passion for the girl. He would be teased even more if seen speaking to her. My name is Johannes Ilfer, said the fireman, offering Anna Louisa a cigarette. My name is Johannes too, said Hansel. Anna Louisa waved the cigarette aside. We call him Hans, she explained. We? Said the fireman. He is your son? I thought you were the nurse. Anna Louisa enjoyed his obvious discomfort. You mustn't jump to conclusions. Do you never smoke? He asked, the packet still open in his hand. Not in the street. Have one yourself. It's forbidden. He brushed his fine moustache with the back of his hand. Lift me up again, called Hansel, and Johannes Ilfer did so. The little boy fingered the shiny steering wheel and then looked at his hero in wonder. We mustn't be a nuisance, said Anna Louisa. You couldn't be a nuisance. He looked at her for a long time, trying to find something to say, something that would make her delay and make her smile at him again. We must go. She smiled at the fireman. Make Mutti bring you again. Hansel, called the fireman. Yes, said Hansel. And he gripped Anna Louisa's fingers in his warm hand as though he was part of a conspiracy. Say goodbye to Herr Ilfer, and thank you, she told the child. They both waved when they reached the corner. At Mauerstrasse, they turned right. This was the main road that joined Kleve to Krefeld and followed the ancient walls that marked the edge of Altgarten. On the other side of Mauerstrasse, a wide stream moved sluggishly southwards. Hansel liked to throw pieces of paper into the green water and run to each of the wooden bridges to see them move underneath. Much of the wall still remained, and Frau Beer's tea room was built into the massive stones. From the second floor there was a view as far as the high ground upon which stood the burgomaster's glasshouses near the waterworks. In the other direction there was a view of the Wald Hotel, now taken over by the SS and garlanded with tall barbed wire fences and endlessly patrolled by guard dogs. Smart Hausfrauen of Altgarten gathered in Frau Beer's tea room each afternoon, accompanied by their daughters in neat dark dresses and well-kept shoes. That's why Tenno officers, army doctors and administration officials from the amputee centre liked to have tea here. Sometimes cavalry officers and veterinary surgeons, complete with spurs and riding crops, came all the way from their depot near Kempen and set the ladies' hearts aflutter. Hansel and Anna Louisa shared a slice of Apfelstrudel. The coffee wasn't too bad, and Frau Beer could usually find a small glass of milk for the boy. The people in the big cities didn't live as well as this, thought Anna Luisa. Life seemed unbelievably sweet. Soon she would be Frau Bach, and the ladies in the tea shop with their fruit-filled hats would have to nod in a way different from the condescending smiles they gave to the arrayed girl. Frau Hinkelberg, the architect's wife, was just as condescending as any of them, but at least she was affable. This day she sat with Anna Luisa and Hansel and told them all her news. There were always stories about the Russian prisoners of war in the disused factory beyond the brewery. The citizens of Algarten were fascinated and a little afraid of these strange Bolshevik men from the far side of the world where so many young Germans were being sent. They put 2 fierce guard dogs to keep the Russians inside the fence at night. Even the dog handlers were wearing thick protective gloves. By the next morning the dogs had been cooked and eaten. Only the bones remained, but they say, and those they carved into crucifixes. Frau Hinkelberg paused long enough to cut a piece of cake and hurry it into her mouth. Anna Luisa felt that she was expected to add something, but she kept her own wonderful news to herself, to be gloated over and devoured slowly. Even before she'd swallowed her cake, Frau Hinkelberg smiled at Anna Luisa and began again. Frau Kirsten is going to put apple trees in the field behind the cemetery, and she's bought the land she leased from Richter. The money she must make from the potatoes. Frau Hinkelberg opened her fine new patent leather handbag so that Anna Luisa could clearly see its Paris label. From it she took a small lace handkerchief and brushed a cake crumb from the corner of her mouth. I heard that Frau Kirsten has a leather box full of money hidden in her bedroom. She can't bank it, they say, for fear of the tax department. Her farmhouse is being replastered by the French prisoners of war, added Frau Hinkelberg. Have you noticed the tall one with the tiny moustache? The one giving orders? He's giving more than that, my girl. If the stories about him and Frau Kirsten are true. But Frau Kirsten is nearly 50. Many a fine tune is played upon an old violin. Frau Hinkelberg laughed loudly and clamped her hand over her mouth in a gesture she believed refined. The diamonds on her hand caught the light. Before the Frenchman, they say she was casting her eyes farther afield. What do you mean? Said Anna Luisa. Your employer, my dear. Anna Luisa laughed good-naturedly. You think that's funny? But Herr Bach and that fat old Frau Kirsten. Yes, Frau Kirsten would be a lucky woman to have Herr Bach as a husband, admitted Frau Hinkelberg as she thought about it. Any woman would be a lucky woman. Frau Hinkelberg looked up sharply. Her ears were attuned to chance remarks, and she never missed an innuendo. Ach so, was all she said, but Anna Luisa knew that one part of her secret was a secret no longer. Frau Hinkelberg put a freckled, bejeweled hand upon Anna Luisa's thin white arm and smiled at her. You were not here when the Wald Hotel was really a hotel. What a wonderful place! The chef was French, from Monte Carlo. People came from all corners of Europe, and from America too, to dine there and stay in the suites that face onto the gardens and the forest. There were floodlit fountains and an orchestra outside in the summer. They used to dance until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and the sound of the music could be heard right across the town on a still summer's night. When I was a young girl, I would open my bedroom windows and listen to the music and the voices of the fine people who left their motor cars and chauffeurs waiting down there in Mauerstrasse. It will never be the same again. When the war is ended, perhaps. No. The world has changed since then. There is no place for romance now. Why? Look at what the Wald Hotel is now used for. No one knows what it's used for. I know, said Frau Hinkelberg. My husband is an architect, and he heard it from someone in the burgomaster's office. She leaned closer to emphasize the confidential nature of her theory. It's a human stud. Young, carefully chosen Aryan girls are sent there to... She hesitated. To have children, by selected SS officers. "How awful," said Anna Luisa. She said it mechanically, for she did not believe it. "Awful," agreed Frau Hinkelberg. "And yet fascinating, is it not? There are so many stories about the men in the Vold Hotel, because they so seldom emerge from the place." "Probably," agreed Anna Luisa. "Well, it's understandable," said Frau Hinkelberg. "They have everything they want there, don't they?" She laughed coarsely. Anna Luisa smiled. "Are you going anywhere tonight?" "Anna Luisa, I have so much ironing to do." "I thought you might be going to the Burgomaster's birthday party at Frenzel's. They are having Russian caviar and roast duckling. I am going." "Herr Bach scarcely knows the Burgomaster, but his cousin Gerd knows him." She watched the girl carefully. "And you are a friend of Andy Niels, the Burgomaster's secretary." "He's no friend of mine," said Anna Luisa. "He's horrid." "He has a reputation," agreed Frau Hinkelberg. "But he wields a great deal of influence in this town. The girls with extra clothing ration coupons. You'd never believe." She laughed again. "I have heard stories about him," said Anna Luisa. "There are stories about everyone in this town. Small towns are always full of gossip. There are stories about you, but you would laugh if you heard them." "About me? It means nothing, child. A beautiful girl is bound to have stories told about her." "In connection with whom?" interrupted Anna Luisa angrily. The woman smiled, and Anna Luisa knew that she wanted her to be angry. "Whom?" repeated Anna Luisa. "What lies are being spread?" "I never listen to scandal," said the old woman haughtily. "Well, it's all stupid nonsense." "I have told you that." "With whom?" "With everyone. Child, you would have to be the most energetic courtesan since Pompadour." She patted her arm again, and the bejeweled rings flashed in the sunlight. Fischer was a young man, 24 last birthday, but his bloodshot eyes and the black rings of tiredness around them made his appearance deceptive. Now that he had had a steaming hot bath and washed the Russian dust out of his hair, he shook away some of his fatigue. He found a last clean set of underclothes and a reasonably clean shirt in his baggage. An orderly had just returned his boots to him brightly shining, although there were deep scratches that went right through the leather in places. His long leather overcoat hanging on the door was also beyond salvage. Its lapels were scuffed white, and the sleeve seams had been ripped and re-sewn so many times that it was crook-backed. He put the knight's cross over his head and tucked the lady's garter, to which it was attached under his collar, out of sight. In the front line, no one any longer wore their conspicuous Leibstandarte cuff-band, but now Fischer put it on his sleeve. The words Adolf Hitler shone bright and new compared with the faded fabric of his jacket. Fischer stroked the armband. The No. 1 SS Division. And he was to join No. 12. He feared it might be like this run-down SS training depot, where even the sentries were improperly dressed and the slow-witted young officers only half-trained. It depressed him to think about it. He looked at himself in the mirror. A tall, slim man with a yellowish complexion that never altered, no matter how long he spent in the sunshine. His eyes were black, intelligent and attractive. His brows were bushy, meeting above his large hooked nose to make a straight line across his face. At school, he had been chosen to play Julius Caesar when his teacher said that he looked exactly like a Roman emperor. Adolf Fischer liked that idea, and even now he would sometimes have too many drinks and surprise the other officers, who knew him only as a zealous and consistently savage warrior, by long quotations from Shakespeare's play. These rooms on the first floor with balconies overlooking the lake had once been the finest rooms in the hotel. The bridal suite? Perhaps. Now they were used for officers in transit, and they had been left unaltered, even to the china jug and basin on the marble washstand, with an enamelled jug of boiling water delivered each morning to the rooms without baths. The pictures too remained: Stag Hunt, Dawn in the Mountains, and Napoleon after Waterloo. There was a knock at the door. "Come in!" bawled Fisher. He was surprised to find that his visitor was an old man who outranked him considerably. Embarrassed by the manner in which he had shouted, Fisher came to a stiff position of attention and waited with unseeing eyes until his visitor bid him relax. "Standartenführer Wirth." The old man introduced himself. His voice was quiet and his manner hesitant. Fisher had to watch his lips to understand his words. "I'm the commanding officer. Please continue with whatever you were doing. I only wish to offer you my greetings, as I shall not be dining in the mess this evening. The burgomaster here in Altgarten is an old Allgemeiner SS officer, and he's having a rather formal dinner party." It was frightening, thought Fisher. The German cross medal on the old man's pocket showed that he had been a fighting soldier in this war, and yet now he'd become a mere vegetable, wrinkled and bent like an old turnip, and so pale that Fisher felt positively tanned beside him. "I have acquaintances nearby, sir. It was my intention to call upon them this evening." "Splendid," said the old man. "You're going to this new Hitler Jugend division. The division commander was with me in the Leibstandarte. He's asked for me." "Reich Germans?" "Yes. All of them born in 1926, volunteers from the Hitler Jugend. It will be an elite division, yes. My tame Untermensch will look out of place." "So I hear?" Fisher felt obliged to answer the unspoken question. "He's a first-class gunner and mechanic. I had him assigned as a personal servant only in order to keep him. You're a tank man." "Tigers, I volunteered for the first tank company the LAH got. Cavalryman myself." He flinched from some secret pain. "Left a hand behind in Rzhev. Can't hold a rein and fight with one hand." Fisher noticed the stiff glove. Cavalry. That explained everything. These old fogies are from another world. Cavalry Brigade Fegelein? Yes.
It's largely Volksdeutsche now. In my time, it was just Reich Germans. It was an elite unit then. I know that, so, Wirth looked at Fisher's cuff band, and then again at the young man's face. He saw his own youth there. Wirth was with the Leibstandarte in 1937. What fine fellows we were. Our average age was 18 years 1 month. Liebchen aller Herzen they called LAH in those days. Heartbreakers we were too. Handsome fellows. The volunteer ahead of Wirth at the medical was failed for having one filled tooth. He could scarcely believe it now. When he looked at some of the odds and ends they had sent him. Dutchmen, some of them, and Flemings too. Keen, of course. But he couldn't understand a word they said. Somewhere nearby, a guard dog barked and then another one. There were shouts and a yelp of pain before the dogs became quiet. "Those damned dogs will drive me mad," muttered Wirth. "I can well believe it, sir," said Fisher.
"Why don't you get rid of them?" "Why, indeed," said Wirth, and smiled as though Fisher had made a rather good joke. Liebstandarte. This old man. Was it possible? Rzhev. January 42. The Rzhev pocket. It was months since he'd last spoken of it. My company of cavalry were trying to find Ivana. Our artillery found us. In the snow, horses and riders moved like ghosts. Silent and invisible in their newly issued white smocks. Wirth was riding Rosenrosper, a light-footed horse as fast as any other in the company, and with a gentle disposition. They were in the Valdai Hills, where the Volga rises, north of Rzhev. They had come over the rise cautiously. Henschel first on the black mare that he'd had all the way from the training school in Warsaw. At the bottom of the rise there was a T-34, its turret askew and a black circle round it. Henschel waved them on and then went close to the sooty, burned-out tank. But there was no sign of life there. It was snowing slightly and the horses were fidgety, tossing their heads and missing their footing as they encountered debris, bodies and goodness knows what under the snow. It was our artillery. They must have had the old T-34 zeroed in. By getting close to that, we were asking for it, really. A T-34 might be very different from a Tiger tank, but Russian cavalry looks just like us, way. Eh? Then there was the noise, deafening thuds, and the screams of horses and men. Instead of a black and white silent film, it became a noisy color film. The black mare racing across the snow, dragging young Henschel, his second in command, by his foot, with horse and rider spilling blood as they went. Henschel! Henschel! No horses survived for... 4 men did. Rosenknosper, his favourite, threw him and then kicked wildly. It was frightened, its eyes dilated and mouth open. Then he saw that its belly was split open and its kicking feet entangled in its own entrails. Damn you, Röstchen. Get up. Crawled back 3 miles on hands and knees. The pain. Took 28 hours. Why the devil should he remember it all today? He pushed it back again, deep into a recess in his mind. You were all right. Only survivor. The other 3 died of wounds in hospital. I was there for 3 months. Discharged myself, but only on anti-partisan work after that. That's important duty. Must the fellow relate his adventures? That little scuffle wouldn't merit a mention nowadays. Strong stuff. A whole village sometimes. Old men, old women. And then there's the problem of one's own soldiers with the girls. You take 100 villagers. His voice faded before he described their fate. Strong stuff. I was glad to leave it. Necessary stuff, sir. Sir, we must never let up on any of them, said Fisher. Worth looked at him and nodded, confirming not Fisher's opinion, but his own opinion of Fisher. Worth grimaced involuntarily. Gangrene. Pain recurs more frequently lately.
My foot and hip, too. Without the sun lamp, I can't walk. It was bad luck, sir. Mustn't bore you with my stories. No question of that. Herr Standartenführer. Not much. The old man suddenly became tired. Whitting? He called, in a voice no louder than the rest of his conversation. And from behind the door came an NCO. Leave you now, Fisher. Don't see you again. Luck. Thank you, sir. Fisher came rigidly to attention and averted his eyes as the bent old man was helped out through the door. Moving ever more slowly, he inched his crippled feet forward. Whitting closed the door gently. This is a slight unmeritable man. Meat to be sent on errands, quoted Fisher softly to himself. On the table, there were the remains of his meal. He'd eaten 2 frankfurters and a dish of boiled potatoes, but had left the dehydrated cabbage and powdered soup. German army frankfurters by some miracle of logistics. Tasted the same in Danzig as they did in Paris.
He wondered how his driver was managing the repairs on the Kubelwagen. It would be ready by 10 p.m. He was sure of that. He'd ordered it for 10, and his driver would have it in good order, even if he hadn't eaten, bathed or slept, and was still wearing the same stinking underwear. Still. You can't have everything. From his pocket, he took a small notebook. Written there was the name of Herr Voss, the tailor, followed by his private address. There were 4 other names and addresses in Münster and Dortmund, but they had been ticked. Fisher went out on the balcony to have a cigarette and stare at the placid lake and the ducks. Soon he would phone Andy Niels. The burgomaster's secretary got back to his office at 5:15. There was a note waiting. The burgomaster wanted to see him urgently. He sighed irritably. Already the doorman and the typist next door had given him the same message. He went to check that Meyer's file was still where he had hurriedly pushed it. Only when he was sure it was there did he go next door. "Niels," said the burgomaster, "you have been signing documents and borrowing police dockets in my name without proper authority." Herr Hollander from the marriage registry was standing in the corner with a look of satisfaction on his rat-like face. He had always been jealous of Niels, who he knew could win any argument by invoking the burgomaster's name. Now he was delighted to be in at the young upstart's undoing. Niels had not responded to the burgomaster's statement, so he spoke again. "This file on Meyer, Hans Willi." Meyer, Hans Willi, thought Niels. The old buffoon spoke like an official document. "Explain the downgrading," said the burgomaster. "It's all in order, Herr Burgermeister," said Niels, smiling in one final hope that Reisman would let the matter drop. "I didn't ask you that, Niels. He wanted to be." "What do you mean? He wanted to be?" "Don't raise your voice to me, my boy. You know very well that what he wanted is nothing to do with it. You made entries on the documents." "Why?" "So that he could be married." Reisman remembered the dark-eyed boy and girl. "Was he married this afternoon?" "That was him," said Niels. "You frightened the life out of him." "I did?" "He thought you were about to stop the ceremony. It can't be altered now, you know." "I still don't understand," said the burgomaster. Herr Hollander said, "I understand. Herr Burgermeister. Marriage between two persons with 1/3 Jewish blood is forbidden, but marriage between a person with 1/3 Jewish blood and a person with 2/3 Jewish blood is permitted under certain circumstances. The man Meyer wanted to be downgraded so that he could marry the girl. But she must be mad," said the burgomaster, trying sincerely to comprehend it. "A girl with only 1/3 Jewish blood could have married an Aryan." "They are like that," said Herr Hollander. "I get them coming into the registry for advice. It's hard to believe. But some of them would sooner marry one of their own kind than one of us." The burgomaster shook his head in wonder. He looked up at Niels. "What did they pay you?" "Nothing. I did it to help." "They were in love. Must I hand this matter over to the Gestapo?" 3,000 marks, when I think of what I did for you. Niels, it was my influence that secured your discharge from your regiment when your mother told me of your stomach ulcer." "Well, your influence didn't last long, Herr Burgermeister. I didn't get a discharge. I was placed temporarily on the reserve. My papers came this morning. I rejoin the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division in Sicily next week. They are awaiting the invasion. I shall never come back." That little bastard Hollander was smirking gleefully. "You would do well not to come back, though. Niels, give your mother a hero for a son. You at least owe her that."
More than I owe her money to pay the rent and keep her from starving. I would rather starve than have a son like you. You are an enemy of the state, a thief and a liar." Niels stood waiting for the burgomaster's wrath to diminish. "Get out," he said, after a long silence. Niels was pleased to get away so lightly. "And," said the burgomaster. Niels turned. "You will pay the 3,000 marks to the Winter Help Fund and show me the receipt. I shall not withdraw my invitation for dinner tonight, but I shall not be unhappy if you fail to turn up." "Yes, Herr Burgermeister," said Niels, trying to look sad. That was wonderful. He had far better things to do tonight, the dance, and providing the terror flyers stayed away, perhaps a visit to the 4th floor of the annex. There was a tall Viennese nurse whom he rather fancied. She would be tastier than the burgomaster's roast duckling. Niels had been responsible for the 18 invitations to the burgomaster's dinner at Frenzel's. He had done the job carefully, remembering all sorts of obscure cousins and business colleagues. In fact, only one invitation had gone astray, the one to Frau H. Pippert, widow of a building contractor, had been typed with the wrong street name, and the postman had guessed, wrongly,
that it was intended for Fräulein G. Piper, a teacher at the Volksschule. Gerda Piper knew from the moment she opened the envelope that the invitation was not intended for her. On the other hand, she also knew, unlike the burgomaster, that Hannah Piper, Johanna, really, of course, but no one called her that, had died over 6 months ago. Hadn't she received more than a dozen wrongly addressed letters of condolence from brick merchants, timber firms, and manufacturers of stoves and boilers? And hadn't she forwarded them to the brother-in-law of the dead woman at some address in Krakow? Gerda Pippert deserved the invitation. In the circumstances, surely no one would begrudge her honorary membership of the burgomaster's family for one festive evening. It was over 3 years since she had eaten a meal at a fine restaurant, and as for being recognized, if they didn't even know that old Hannah was dead, what chance was there that they would remember her face? Anyway, old ladies looked alike. She could put some new lace on her black dress. One of her ex-students, now an artillery officer, had sent her an antique lace tablecloth from Brussels. She had never risked a teapot on it, but as a collar for the black dress, it would be most chic. She decided to gate-crash the dinner. Or, as she rationalized it to herself, attend as a friend of the family. She had written a brief acceptance, carefully smudging the initial. She looked at herself in the full-length mirror of the wardrobe. It made the dress look quite new. Her white hair was drawn tightly back and fastened with a black ribbon. She would wear just a touch of face powder. It was a special event, after all. And leave her spectacles off. Then she remembered the old lorgnette. It was in the bottom of her sewing box, a splendid device with an ivory handle and gold rims to the glasses. She could no longer see very well through the lenses, but held up to her face, it looked most distinguished. What's more, it would give her something to do with her hands. In the sewing box there was an old ivory cigarette holder too. She put it in her handbag. Tonight, after the coffee and speeches and cognac, she would try a cigarette again. If only her handbag were a little more elegant and the handle weren't so worn, but if she held it low against her skirt, it didn't notice so much. She paraded up and down the bed-sitting room, practicing well-born gestures. The dress looked fine. Tonight, Gerda Pippert, 56-year-old spinster and schoolteacher, was to dine with the burgomaster. It was the most exciting prospect she could remember since her holiday in Heidelberg in 1938. Gerd Boll may have been the town wag, but he was no fool. Sometimes he regretted that he had left the university, for the young people there had a sense of humour more nearly tuned to his than had the people of Altgarten. In spite of disapproving eyes, Gerd continued to act the fool, for he knew that it was his particular strength that he could endure the supercilious remarks of his neighbours without wishing them ill. Of all the people of Altgarten, Gerd's best friends were among the Tino engineers who manned the camp on the Krefeld road. Many times Gerd had taken his van and gone with them into the Ruhr after a big RAF attack. He had seen the Tennos digging for hours into burning wreckage and finding only shriveled corpses. He'd seen them lifting steel beams in their bare hands, and he'd noticed that some of the most pugnacious and disreputable roughnecks among them could be the most gentle with the injured. None of them were young, for the young had all been screened off to provide Tenno battalions for bridge building and demolition with front-line fighting units. Each man had a technical skill, and their easy discipline reflected this. For theirs was a job where a few minutes could mean a cellar full of people saved from flames or drowning. They were a strange breed of men. New to Gerd Boll, they took a drink when others would need a night's sleep. They settled for a cigarette instead of a meal and swore when lesser men would have wept. In addition, Gerd liked their equipment, the tractors, lorries and mobile cranes, the pumps and generators, and the winches that could topple an office block. It was 5:40. Almost time for Gerd to report his movements to the burgomaster's control room. This evening of all evenings it was scarcely necessary, Penol, for he would be at Frenzel's with the burgomaster. For a birthday gift he had bought a small humidor, inlaid with ivory and mother of pearl. One of the Russian POWs had made it for him. He wondered if the burgomaster would disapprove if he knew its origin. Perhaps he would recognize the style of work. For the Madonnas they sold from door to door had the same design on the skirts as the humidor had round its lid. Dark suit? Well, Gerd didn't have a dark suit. Apart from this green suit, he didn't have one at all, and this one had long since ceased to fit him. He unfastened the jacket buttons and breathed out with a long sigh of relief. Well, he'd leave it open. It would never notice when he was sitting down. He sat down now at his antique desk and cleared aside the accounts and unanswered correspondence. From this window he had the ugliest view of Altgarten. The cramped slum tenements crowded together between brewery siding and gasworks, as did the people inside them. In the cobbled street a group of children, some of them in Hitler Youth uniform, were kicking a ball around. Gerd watched them with interest, but eventually the moment he had been putting off arrived. He pulled a piece of paper towards him and sadly began a letter to his cousin August. Rhein Provinz, Altgarten, Bahnhofstrasse 33, June 31st, 1943. My dear kind August, perhaps you will despise me when you have finished reading this letter, and yet, try as I have, I can find no alternative to writing it. This afternoon, when I met you with Anna Louisa, and you both looked so radiantly happy, it seemed clearly my duty, and my joy, to keep silent. Now I once again think otherwise. Think of me and my predicament as I write this letter. As unhappy as you may be, spare a moment to remember that I too am as sad. The test of friendship is the extent to which a man will expose the friendship to total destruction by doing something he believes is in the best interest of his comrade. The girl is beautiful, and to be sure has been a loyal employee and a fine guardian of little Hansel. But a young girl like Anna Louisa has a life different from us. Different, too, from any style of life we can remember. Like any beautiful girl living alone in a town filled with young men, the temptations put to her are unreasonable, but it would be dishonest of me and foolish of you to pretend that she has not succumbed to those temptations in a way that has made her notorious as your housekeeper. Her private life is of only limited importance to you and of no importance to me. But when marriage is mentioned, my dear good cousin, how can I not speak? At first you will dismiss my letter as gossip. Perhaps you will be tempted to ask for details. Do not do that. August, it can only cause you deep and lasting pain. Again I repeat, August, it can only cause you more pain than you already know. Your cousin, Gerd.